Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal M. I'm glad you're here for tonight's Paranormal Stories video. If you enjoy the stories, please give the video a like. And if you've ever had something strange or unexplained happen to you, you can send your story to me. Tonight, we're starting with a story from someone who thought he was just being transferred to another prison, but soon found out there was something very strange about where he had ended up. So settle in. Listen at your own pace, and I hope you have a good, peaceful sleep tonight. Hey, I want to share something with you. Something that happened to me back in 2016. It's a story about being sent to the wrong kind of jail, but not in the way you might think. It's not about being innocent or guilty. It's about being somewhere I wasn't meant to be, and what that did to me. So I was convicted of armed robbery. Yeah, that part's true. But after that, something strange happened. When they moved me from the county jail in October, I went through this intense processing. They didn't just take my fingerprints. They did blood tests, sent my hair off to some lab, and took pictures of my fingernails. I'd never seen anything like it before. It felt like they were pushing me into a particular place, a place I wasn't ready for. I was numb, honestly. I just wanted it all to be over. I didn't think about the paperwork, the stamps on the legal documents, or what those stamps meant. I just wanted to drift away for the next 6 years. No thoughts, no feelings. When I got to my new cell, I was paired with a guy named Lian Soon. He was Chinese American, looked like your average college student, but there was something off about him. He didn't really look at you. It was like he was somewhere else, miles away. We barely spoke, just agreed I'd take the top bunk. Our days were simple but rigid. Breakfast, work until 11, lunch, more work, a little time in the yard, dinner, then either programming like religious services or anger management, or an extra hour outside. Lights out by 11. I had a job cleaning bedding, cheap stuff that tore easily. I remember poking a pillow and it going right through like it was paper. Washing them barely helped. I even saw a cockroach crawl out of one pillowcase after a wash, still alive. Feathers from ripped pillows floated everywhere, even in the yard. People mostly kept to themselves. No chatter, no boasting, just quiet survival. But from the start, something about the yard felt wrong. No one used the exercise equipment, no loud conversations or games. People stuck close to the walls or silently walked by the fences. And as soon as the free hour ended, everyone rushed back inside. Dust covered the weights. I couldn't figure it out. By the end of the first week, I was settling in. I'd be out cold by 10 most nights, thankful for bedding with fewer holes. But then there was this one night, the night I couldn't sleep. I lay down, but suddenly I was wide awake. There was this whistling wind down the hall, echoing, growing louder and louder until it sounded like a fire truck siren blaring just for me. I pressed my hands over my ears, buried my head in my pillow, but nothing helped. So I started whispering to myself, just to fill the silence. "Please stop," I kept saying. And you know what? It stopped. The next day I was wiped out. I nodded off at every meal, guards nudged me awake, and the other inmates stared or avoided me like I was broken. When it was time for the yard, the guards pulled me aside to help clean feathers instead. No yard time for me. That night, same story. Wide awake, that howling wind coming down the hall, growing louder. Whispering didn't work anymore. I had to actually speak out loud, even though there was no one there to hear me. Around midnight, I was still awake, talking to myself, trying to drown out the noise that felt like it was trying to pull me apart. I honestly don't know how Lian tolerated it. He just lay there, silent. Things got worse. I barely slept at all. I was exhausted, falling asleep brushing my teeth, losing track of my thoughts. People noticed. There was this guy, Marlon, new like me, short, athletic, itching for a fight. I accidentally bumped into him in the lunch line and he exploded. Pushed me, hit me with a tray, started beating me. The guards were slow to react, so I took it. But then something snapped. I grabbed his shirt, looked him dead in the eye. "You want to get whipped, Greenie?" I said. "You want us to whip you?" It was like words came out of nowhere, forced out by exhaustion. He froze, shocked. His eyes welled up, and he backed against a wall, speechless. The guards finally stepped in, and the fight ended. I whispered, "See you at the orchard, Greenie. Whip, whip." Marlon broke down, screaming and crying on the floor. The guards carried him away. I thought I'd feel better afterward, but instead, I felt like a freak. Everyone stared like I was some kind of monster. That smile on my face wasn't mine. It was fake, a mask. I was losing control, scared I was becoming a puppet to something else. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I paced, screamed into a pillow, massaged my ears. Leanne finally looked at me, not through me. "You on something? You itching?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just broken. Something's not right." "You phobic? Trouble with the walls?" "Maybe. I don't know. Can't sleep." "Looks like you sleep all the time, just not in here." He asked about my stamps. Blue ones. Apparently everyone got them. "What shape?" he asked. "Dunno." He said most had a hand stamp, some had a sunflower. The sunflower ones were different. "Maladaptive," he said, like it was a secret code. I laughed bitterly. Private prisons. Bullshit, all of it. Leanne sighed and closed his eyes. That night, the wind was louder than ever. I pressed my head against the door, hoping it would take pity on me, that it'd either end me or stop. And then, something strange happened. The wind softened to a whistle, then a gentle hum. It turned beautiful. I leaned into it and, for the first time in forever, I slept deeply. Next morning, Leanne woke me as the guards did rounds. I felt amazing, but even then, that faint whistling lingered in my mind. It was like a melody speaking through feelings, not words. I wasn't paying attention during breakfast. Then Marlon crept up behind me with a sharpened toothbrush. Something inside me screamed to hurt him, and I did. The world shifted. I felt taller, stronger, like I was a kid running through an orchard, being chased by brothers holding tire irons. "Whip, whip," I remembered saying. When I came to, I was laughing, but it wasn't my laugh. Marlon was on the floor, bleeding badly, twitching like a fish out of water. I had no idea how far I'd gone, but it looked brutal. They took me back to my cell, parading me like a prize. Inmates stared, then recoiled. I was locked in for hours, no one allowed inside. The singing in my head kept growing, turning to pain if I tried to resist. I paced, spewing nonsense, random words about people I didn't even know. When the guards finally opened the door, tasers ready, I didn't stop talking. I ranted about things no one could understand. Then, zap! The taser hit my neck. I didn't even feel it. I convulsed, laughing inside, trapped by someone else's control. They dragged me out to the yard. The guards spoke quietly nearby, like they were in another room. "Hatchet men mixed up the blood works," one said. "Got the wrong class." "Shit, we got a bloomer?" "Whole time?" "Christmas miracle he didn't pop his celly." "So why we taking him out?" "Protocol." "Fuck protocol." They left me alone in the middle of the yard, guards forming a circle around me. I felt a tingle, like my mind and body pouring back into each other, memories, language, senses returning. I stood, barefoot, the cold air sharp on my skin. The sky was still, but heavy with menace. "Nothing's happening. Take him in?" "Hold on. Look up." At first I thought snow was falling, but it wasn't snow. A single white feather landed on my nose. I looked up into the clouds, and there it was. Something enormous, impossible. An eye in the sky. It spoke to me without words, flashing memories I didn't know I had. Waking in my crib, my mother's cardigan, her big glasses, toys dancing overhead. It told me we're born to reach beyond ourselves, to stretch toward the sky, to pull the unknown into our being. This was my instinct, my purpose. "No," I gasped. I floated 6 feet off the ground, suspended between two worlds. "No!" I screamed, memories of dreams, love, joy rushing toward me, waiting to be grasped. But that eye wasn't cruel or angry, just vast, beyond comprehension. I was a strand of wheat, plucked by a farmer's hand. "No, no, no!" I cried out. Guards grabbed my legs, pulling me down, tearing me in two. The peaceful silence turned to a scream. "We got it! Get him out!" Suddenly, one guard went limp, whisked away by an invisible force like a soft whistle in the wind. Another fell, grabbed, and vanished into the dark. "Run!" the remaining guard shouted, waving me inside desperately. Every part of me wanted to stay, to reach up, to touch the sky, to return to that place I was meant to be. But my body knew to run. Inside, the yard erupted. The howling wind was gone, replaced by the sound of destruction. Meat and bone flying, fabric torn. Whatever had been up there was satisfied. We stood silently, not as inmates and guards, but as people trying to grasp the unexplainable. The next day, they reprocessed me. This time, the blood test was clear. No mix-up. I finally saw the blue sunflower stamp on my papers. They moved me out of state, said it was for security because of the fight with Marlin. But I knew better. It was about correcting a mistake. That prison had a purpose, but I wasn't part of it. I did my time somewhere with no wind, no whispers. Now I'm out on parole, but even now, when I hear a whistling wind, a shiver runs through me. I'm scared of my dreams, my memories. Scared there's still something inside me pulling me back, telling me to look up. My psychiatrist, Dr. Bogan, says I have agoraphobic trauma. She wants to try experimental treatments, but I'm hesitant. Overexposure therapy sounds risky. Still, sometimes I wake in the middle of the night, my body speaking truths I don't understand. Sometimes in no language at all, and every now and then, a single white feather lands on my shoulder, and I know. Looking up again could be the end of me. Hey, I want to share something with you. Something that's been on my mind for a long time now. It's a story about a flower shop, a family legacy, and some very strange blue flowers that changed everything. So, bear with me as I take you through it. It all started on a day that seemed ordinary, at least at first. I was working at the flower shop, the one my mom used to own. This older woman came in, looking determined, almost desperate. She asked for blue flowers. "I'm sorry," I told her, trying to keep my calm. "We're out of the blue ones." She looked at me, disbelief etched deep into her wrinkled face. "All out? How can you be all out?" I tried to offer alternatives. "We have some beautiful purple azaleas that might work." "They're not blue," she interrupted, stomping her foot hard enough that the floor seemed to shake. "They have to be blue." I could see the frustration boiling over. "Mrs. Morris, we have several types of, but they're not goddamn blue." Her voice was sharp, angry. Suddenly, with a sweep of her arm, she knocked over an entire display of herbs, ramson, dill, basil, all cascading to the floor in a chaotic mess. I just stood there frozen, mouth open, staring at the scattered greenery. "You're getting me blue, you grinning bitch! You're getting me blue!" she yelled before storming out, nearly toppling a stack of pots on her way. My hands were trembling. Things had spiraled out of control. But it wasn't always like this. My mom, she was a flower girl once, tending a small stall by the old railroad tracks since she was just a young teen. At 18, she fell in love with a local rancher's son, my dad. A few years later, after a shotgun wedding, they started building a life together. Dad wanted to give her everything. What started as that small stall grew into a flower shop just off Main Street. The Green Gardens, or as we called it, the Big Green, was her sanctuary. She lived there, breathed the flowers, spent 12 hours or more every single day in that shop, whether it was open or not. That place was her heart, just like I was. I never planned to take over the shop. I dreamed of being a marine biologist, exploring the mysteries of the ocean. But when Mom fell ill, everything changed. She slowly withdrew from 12 hours a day to just a couple of hours a week. It was just Dad and me handling the shop, and he had other work to do. I remember turning 21 behind that counter, surrounded by wilting flowers, the scent of soil, and the quiet hum of the city outside. Someone had to keep the shop alive. When Mom passed away at 23, it felt like the flowers themselves had withered with her. Doctors never really figured out what was wrong. Some kind of calcium deficiency, maybe. It was like her body was turning against her. Dad and I thought about selling the shop, but we couldn't. It wasn't just a business, it was a legacy. No one wanted to keep it running. They just wanted the land. Dad couldn't bear to see it turned into a cafe or bar. The Big Green had to stay green. I remember one quiet dinner with Dad after a long day. We sat there, plates empty, the kitchen clock ticking loudly. "No one thought it'd grow," he said. "The soil's rough, too much calcium." "Mom made it work," I said, nodding. "Yeah, in a way," he agreed. "But to the soil, no one is perfect." Dad wasn't coping well. He quit his job and left town, leaving me alone with the shop and the house. I understood, but I still felt abandoned. I celebrated many birthdays behind that counter, watching my dreams of the ocean fade. Dad was right. The soil was stubborn and unforgiving. We brought in flowers from suppliers, but we also tried growing local varieties like forget-me-nots, garden roses, lilacs, and sunflowers in our greenhouses. Over the years, though, it became harder to keep anything alive. Roses crumbled, lilacs lost their color, and even the flowers in the shop would dry up, no matter how much water they got. One early June morning stands out. I opened the shop to find every plant in the front window dead overnight. I had replaced all the soil Mom had used, but death had come anyway. That day, I closed the shop early, wondering if I should even open it again. Then, things started to change. The next day, 2 elderly women were admiring the front window. I'd cleaned most of the dead plants, but a few sunflowers in the corner looked strange. I hadn't even removed them. They were vibrant blue with black stems. Blue? That was odd. "Trying something new?" Mrs. Solis asked with a smile. "Lovely color." "Yeah," I said, still uneasy. "It is." They looked at me, waiting for an explanation. I had none. The flowers felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. It was as if I was the intruder, not them. Throughout the day, more of these blue flowers appeared. Sunflowers, lilacs, dahlias, freesias, all tinged with this unnatural blue. Mrs. Solis and her friend oohed and awed, marveling at the novelty. "Did you dye them?" she asked. "No," I answered, though truthfully, I hadn't grown them either. Customers stopped, drawn in by the strange flowers. Some bought so many they could barely carry them. I swear, some flowers seemed to appear out of thin air. People smelled them, stroked their petals, admired the different shades of blue. Two grown men from a nearby construction site almost fought over a bouquet of garden roses. By closing time, only a few non-blue flowers remained, those that had somehow survived the drought. I called my supplier, but no extra shipments were available. I had to rely on what was in the greenhouse. To my shock, the greenhouses were bursting with blue flowers. Smaller, yes, but vibrant and alive. Overnight, the green gardens had turned blue. People loved them, but I felt uneasy. Alone with those flowers, I felt watched, judged, like they were turning towards me. That night, I called Dad for the first time in months. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern in his voice. "Dad, did Mom ever talk about blue flowers?" There was a long pause, then his breath caught. "Yeah, she mentioned them a few times." "What did she say?" He hesitated. "She thought they were weeds, said she'd get rid of them." "Did she?" "Yeah, I think so. She said it was some chemical in the soil she didn't like." "Are they back?" "Yeah, the shop's full of them." "Be careful," he warned. "I don't want you to get sick too." The next morning, I decided to clear them all out. I agreed with Mom. They seemed unnatural, the color too vibrant, just off. In the greenhouse, I grabbed a blue sunflower and tried to pull it out. The petals rattled and the stem trembled. I let go, bewildered. I never thought a flower could react like that. I tried again, steady and slow. The rattling returned. I stepped back, heart pounding. Maybe it was like those videos of octopus arms moving with soy sauce. Finally, I gripped firmly and pulled. The rattling stopped. Then came the smell, awful and sickening, like rotten fish mixed with fake citrus, a chemical disguise. I dropped the flower, retching. My fingertips ached, nerves pulling tight. The flower shriveled into a gray, dried husk on the floor. The smell lingered. My hands shook, and I felt like I'd committed a terrible sin. I couldn't clear them all out, not just because of the cost, but because people adored them. As long as they were happy, what harm? Still, the smell haunted me. So I opened the greenhouses to the public, doubled the price, and stayed open longer. People flocked in, eager for the blue flowers. Even John Gaines, the stoic guy from the gas station, smiled as he picked one. I let it happen. The blue flowers spread everywhere, their color in every window, garden, storefront. The green gardens was becoming the blue gardens, fitting somehow, given my marine biology dreams. Then came Mrs. Morris's outburst, the day she trashed the herbs and demanded blue flowers. It was a turning point. Her anger was more than grumpiness. It felt like something darker. Other customers began acting strangely, some verbally abusive. That night, exhausted, I slumped by the front door. Despite thinking we were out of blue flowers, a few remained. They rattled their petals, as if responding to me, then stopped together. I wanted to ask if they could hear me, if they had hurt Mom, but I was too scared. What if they answered? Paranoia crept in. I imagined them whispering when I wasn't around, like a twisted Toy Story nightmare. But flowers are flowers, right? Still, the soil imbalance theory didn't explain the violence. On my way to work, I saw blue flowers everywhere, even ones that didn't belong, like a blue Venus flytrap outside a gas station, swollen with flies. It wasn't from my shop. That morning, the store was full of pristine blue flowers, some in pots without soil. The shop looked brand new, smelling sweet and tempting. But all I wanted was to run. So I closed the blue gardens. I taped black bags over the windows and put up a handwritten, "Closed until further notice" sign. Across the street, I heard protests, Mrs. Morris among them. I hurried away. Later, my phone buzzed non-stop. Calls, messages demanding I open. One message chilled me. were going in. I knew they were breaking in. I couldn't let them destroy Mom's shop. I called the police and raced there, but it was too late. Windows shattered, pots overturned, flowers stolen or crushed. The sign vandalized to read only "The Blue." I stood frozen, tears blurring the chaos. A police officer approached, a kind man in his 50s. "I'm sorry," he said. "Insurance should cover it. You need a moment?" I nodded, voice barely a whisper. "You're her daughter, right?" I nodded again. "She had her accidents," he said, chuckling lightly. "One greenhouse burned down once. She never claimed damages, just let it happen. That was Mom's solution. Fire. I thought about it. Maybe that's what made her sick. The plants, the blue flowers, they carried something toxic. I filed reports, took pictures, helped the police. But inside, I planned to burn it all down. The greenhouses, the shop, the entire blue gardens. That night, I returned with gasoline. But the shop was full. People rummaging, eating soil, clutching blue flowers like lifelines. Their eyes were dark, mouths dirty, like twisted versions of themselves. John Gaines approached, holding a garden hoe. I grabbed the nearest blue sunflower pot, ready to defend myself. He stopped, afraid to harm the plant. The flower became my shield. I poured gas everywhere, the smell burning my lungs. I stepped back, lit a lighter, and shouted, "Out! Now!" Flames roared. Screams echoed, human and not. People stumbled out, choking on dirt and seeds, tears streaming. I held tight to the little blue sunflower, my guardian. Around me, the world burned. Sirens wailed in the distance, flames reflecting in the eyes of desperate onlookers. That was years ago. I kept one flower, a single blue sunflower, my sad sunflower, named for its lonely color. I left it in an old apartment, a tiny infection to keep me balanced. I left town, sold the house, and finally pursued my marine biology degree, chasing the true big blue, the ocean. It's sad, losing the green gardens, like losing Mom again. But I think she'd want peace, not this nightmare. I hope the sad sunflower remains alone, and that the blue gardens never harm anyone again. Thanks for listening. Sometimes the strangest stories are the ones closest to home. Hey there. I want to share some stories with you. Real experiences that have left me wondering about the thin veil between our world and something else. So, let's start at the beginning. A little while back, I had this vivid dream about my professor. Let's call him Dr. Blackwell. He was dressed entirely in black, but the classroom was nothing like our usual lecture hall. It felt off. All the desks were shoved together on one side of the room, away from the left wall. I remember chatting with my friend Mia, who was buzzing about some video we were about to watch. We sat there, anticipation in the air, but the video turned out to be absolutely horrifying. Everyone in the room stood frozen, like statues, and I kept thinking, what in the world is going on? Then Dr. Blackwell started handing out permission slips to hypnotize us. Before I could even process it, this blonde woman appeared behind me and snapped her fingers. Suddenly, my body was pressed against the left wall, the same as everyone else. But unlike them, I wasn't fully asleep, more like caught between waking and dream. I tried to reach out to Dr. Blackwell as he walked past, but my hands felt numb, like I was trapped in invisible chains. The woman moved down the row, placing locusts into people's mouths. When she got to me, I was the only one, at least I think I was, to refuse. And then the dream just stopped. Now, here's where it gets eerie. A few days later, I walked into that same class as usual. But this time, I heard these voices inside my head, urging me to leave. I brushed it off as stress or exhaustion and stayed. Dr. Blackwell showed some videos during class, and the last one was a maddening display of strobing lights, flashing violently with words and phrases interspersed. I covered my eyes, feeling sick, but the room felt hypnotized. After class, everyone seemed spaced out, like their minds were elsewhere. I was dazed, asked about an assignment, and left. Later that day, I looked up mass hypnosis methods and found out that strobing lights are indeed used to induce hypnotic trances. Panic set in. I was having a full-blown anxiety attack, telling myself, I have to get out of here now. As I hurried to my car, a crow landed on a nearby pole and cawed sharply at me. It felt like a warning. I debated going back to tell Dr. Blackwell about the seizure risk the video posed. Then I saw him near his car, watching me. I told him my concerns, and he apologized sincerely. But driving home, the feeling of being watched lingered, like something was sitting right beside me. A few days after that unsettling episode, I felt this heavy, oppressive presence surround me. I consulted a psychic friend who told me something was definitely there, angry, and communicating through her. I tried to reason with it, convincing it to leave. It did, but only briefly. When it returned, it wanted me gone. Completely gone. I had to sage my entire house to push it back. I've pieced together some conclusions about that year, but many questions remain. What do you think happened? Am I just losing it? Now, let me tell you about a friend from a few years ago. Let's call him Ethan. In 2019, Ethan was dealing with something deeply troubling. He'd created a shrine in his closet, praying to an entity he described as a faceless man wearing a top hat. This presence told him to harm himself, and tragically, he did. He'd been battling this torment for years before he reached out to me and another friend for help. We gathered at a friend's apartment before heading to Ethan's parents' house, the place where he'd summoned this being. Ethan warned us that the entity was watching one of my friends. We were about 8 or 10 people, but no one else saw anything. Still, I felt this crushing weight on my shoulders. Once inside Ethan's room, I noticed a hand-painted picture resembling Jesus Christ, but something about it felt wrong. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Ethan paced nervously. My other friend pulled out her Bible, and before she began to pray, I approached the open closet. Without realizing it, I was suddenly pushed back across the room, about 7 or 8 feet away from the closet. My heart raced in a fight-or-flight frenzy, but since you can't physically fight something like this, I left the room. When I came back down, Ethan was calm, but my praying friend had tears streaming down her face. Months later, Ethan told us he'd accepted this presence would always be part of his life and had stopped fighting it. I never saw the entity myself, but it still haunts me. If you've had anything similar happen, I'd love to hear your story. Speaking of eerie encounters, I once lived in a split house where my husband often hung out upstairs, leaving me alone downstairs. One day, while in the bathroom, I heard footsteps and whistling from the kitchen. I assumed it was him, but the tune was odd. Exactly the same, repeating, stopping, and restarting in a strange pattern. The whistling got faster and distorted into an unhuman pitch, pressing against the bathroom door handle. I braced it, heart pounding, fearing someone would break in. Then silence. I paced nervously before daring to open the door. Since then, whenever I hear whistling alone, I freeze, hoping it won't return. But there's more. In that same flat, I had a terrifying encounter with what I think might have been a skinwalker or wendigo. It was the worst fear I've ever felt, an overwhelming sense that my life was in danger. One night, our dog was barking outside, so I went to check. The dog went back inside, leaving me alone near a shed. I heard scuffling noises, like a person crawling on all fours. Panic gripped me as the noise moved closer to the shed door. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me. The dread didn't fade. It felt like the presence was inside my home, moving along the walls, and then, suddenly, in the kitchen. Too scared to look, I slammed the door again, praying it would leave, and it did. Months later, with the back door open on a warm summer evening, I was on my laptop when I sensed movement outside. Our dog suddenly stopped, looked at me, then headed outside. I peeked and saw a crouched humanoid figure by the door frame, skin like burnt earth, hairless and emaciated. It twisted its form to watch our dog, the source of those scuffling noises. I threw my laptop down and ran upstairs, refusing to go back down alone. I'm grateful the dog was there to warn me. Otherwise, I dread to think what could have happened. A friend suggested it was a skinwalker, and though rare in Europe, there are stories. I'm just glad we moved away. Currently, I'm dealing with a ghost that seems to stalk me around the house. I've always lived with spirits, given my proximity to a large graveyard, but this presence is different. It follows me up and down the stairs, but never crosses the last 5 steps. Sometimes it leans over me while I brush my teeth, watching through the mirror. When my husband was away recently, it grew stronger, and I started having visions of a pale figure with long, unkempt black hair and a hunched back. I'd caught glimpses of its face in the mirror before. Pale, haunting. At night, it creeps into my bedroom, leaning close to me, staring silently. Its presence feels like static electricity against my skin. I have to turn away to sleep. When my husband returned, it backed off but still lingered nearby, waiting in the spare room. Now, on May 1st, it's back, following me, even reaching out to touch my hair. I've told it to stop, but it just keeps coming, unfazed by my awareness. I don't know what it wants, but it's relentless. One more dream I had was about a lonely woman in a cornfield. After a long day, I closed my eyes and saw an old farm field. The scarecrow was nothing but broken wood and tattered clothes. The weeds had overtaken everything, and the ground was uneven with mounds of dirt. Suddenly, the view sank beneath the earth, revealing a woman's face, pale, rotting, surrounded by roots. She stared straight at me, abandoned and forgotten. I opened my eyes, hoping the image would fade, but it stayed. When I closed them again, the field was full of tall corn, and the scarecrow had a face and stuffing, its hat barely perched. I told my partner about it until the images disappeared. The field felt isolated, surrounded by trees, with a small wooden fence. It broke my heart, thinking she might be there, waiting for someone to find her and bring her peace. Lastly, I have to tell you about the most terrifying presence I've faced, the haunting smiler. This thing appears in my dreams, and sometimes even in waking moments. Its face is disturbingly human, but just beyond human limits. Eyes wide open, round eyeballs visible, filled with a chilling intensity like someone staring death in the face. Its mouth is a closed, effortless smile, like Jack Nicholson's Joker, but the expression is blank and silent. One time, I dreamed I was cleaning the house and saw my partner standing by the boiler in the airing cupboard, which was impossible because of the shelves. The face was wrong. It was the smiler's. I woke up terrified, unable to shake the feeling. Another time, in a store, I felt that off presence again, and turned to see the smiler in someone else's body, staring at me. I snapped awake. Once, unable to sleep, I felt it enter my room, bending over me with its face inches from mine. I clung to my partner, eyes shut tight, until it vanished. Last night, in a dream, I saw a woman shouting at me about a game on her phone. Suddenly, the smiler appeared, wearing the woman's hair, looming high in the doorway, staring and smiling. I tried to scream, but only muffled sounds came out until my partner woke me. This thing seems determined to torment me, but I'm staying put for now. If anyone recognizes this or has faced something similar, please reach out. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm grateful to be sharing these stories with someone who might understand. Thanks for listening, And if you ever feel like the shadows are reaching out, remember, you're not alone. Hey, I want to share something with you that's been weighing on me for a long time. It's a story about a small town, a class I took, and something I can't quite explain. I hope you'll hear me out. So, this all started the year I went off to college. My name's Rick, by the way, not Richard. That year was supposed to be the start of my new life, but instead, it became the darkest time I can remember. My parents died in a car accident, a massive 5-car pileup on a cold autumn evening somewhere not too far from here. They were trapped in the middle of everything. The EMTs couldn't reach them in time. And there was a fire. It wasn't the kind of peaceful passing you hear about. It was awful. The kind of thing that leaves you hollow and scared. After that, I couldn't stay in college. I dropped out during my first semester. I had some money from their inheritance and life insurance, enough to keep me afloat. Everyone around me kept saying, sell the house, move somewhere new, start fresh. But I just couldn't process any of it. It was too much. If it hadn't been for my Aunt Lila, I don't know how I would have managed. She was incredible, arranged the funeral, helped me move, called me every single day just to check in. Honestly, she was like my guardian angel. That's how I ended up here, in this tiny town in Minnesota. It feels like the middle of nowhere, really quiet and slow. I bought a cheap little house and took a job at the local warehouse, thanks to my Aunt Lila's husband. I didn't mind the small town life. It suited me. It was peaceful, at least on the surface. For a few years, I just lived quietly. After a while, once the initial chaos settled, I thought about going back to school, just a little. I'd always been interested in electronics, tinkering with things. So I took a chance and enrolled in an evening class on basic electronics at the community college here. I was shy, really shy, but Aunt Lila encouraged me. Said I should just try it once. The class was small, just 8 of us. That first night, we learned how to shorten a cable. We carefully stripped it, cut the copper, then put it back together. The teacher made sure everything worked, and it felt amazing to make something with my own hands. After class, I stuck around and chatted with some of the other students. There was Jonah, unemployed like me, probably my age. Paula, a young woman hoping to get an apprenticeship with a local electrician. And 2 guys, Will and Gary, who worked at the community theater. We were deep in conversation when Will smiled and said, "Just small-scale stuff, adding little lights to backdrops, that kind of thing." Jonah laughed, saying, "I just need an excuse to get out of my apartment sometimes. It feels good to stay busy." Then Paula turned to me and asked, "What about you, Rick? What are you hoping to get from this class?" I started to answer, but then I froze. The room seemed to hold still. My eyes flicked from one face to the next, and something was wrong. They weren't blinking, not moving at all, like statues. Not a single breath, nothing. It was as if time itself stopped. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt this rush of panic. Then, Paula's hand rested softly on my shoulder. "Rick, are you okay?" she asked, voice soft but real. I realized I'd been holding my breath for who knows how long. I shook my head and forced a smile. "Sorry," I said, chuckling nervously. "Long day. Anyone want to grab a coffee?" They all did. We went out for coffee, but I couldn't shake the feeling from earlier. That moment stuck with me, sharp and cold. That night, as I lay in bed, my heart beat loud in my ears. I could almost hear it thumping in my fingers, in the quiet of my room. I didn't want to cover myself with blankets. I felt too hot. So I slept on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling, counting each heartbeat. When I went back to class the next time, I was nervous. I didn't want to feel that frozen, empty feeling again. This time, we were dismantling an old TV. We worked as a group, each tasked with identifying parts. Then, using the manual, we explained how electricity flowed through the device. Gary was in the middle of presenting when that sour, bitter feeling crept up my throat again. Gary froze mid-sentence, his words cut off. The room fell silent. My classmates were like statues again, and even the classroom clock stopped ticking. But then, outside the door, I heard footsteps. Uneven steps, one foot stepping firmly, the other dragging slowly. They echoed in the hallway, clear as day. There was a frosted glass window in the door, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I didn't dare turn my head to look directly, but I could sense something shifting just beyond the glass. A crinkling sound, like someone clutching a paper bag tightly. The door opened just a crack. A voice whispered, muffled and hollow, stretched out like a sad song. "Please, someone. There has to be someone. You have to wake me. Wake me, please." The door opened wider, but I stayed frozen, eyes locked straight ahead. Suddenly, Gary spoke again. "It won't work until you reconnect it," he said, pointing at the flyback transformer. "It wasn't connected when we opened it, so someone's been tampering with it." The teacher laughed. "Looks like we have a proper repairman. Well done, everyone." Will added, "Messing with the heatsink too. Do we get extra credit for that?" I just straightened my back and stared at the door. It was ajar now. Had it been open all along? I felt sick to my stomach, like something was twisting inside me. My pulse pounded for hours after class. Sleep was elusive, and the next day at the warehouse, I was drowsy, inattentive, skipping lunch just to nap. One afternoon, as I was heading back to work after my break, that awful feeling hit again. The lunchroom clock had stopped. Everything froze in my chest. Then I remembered. The clock hadn't worked for weeks. No one bothered to change the batteries. Relief mixed with deep unease. I thought about quitting the classes. I didn't want to feel like that again, but I couldn't. I needed answers. I needed to understand whatever this was. The third time I arrived early to class, I found Jonah, Paula, Will, and Gary chatting. Paula was unusually quiet, her dark circles deeper and her eyelids heavy. I asked, "Paula, you okay? Late night?" She sighed, about to answer when the clock stopped ticking. Red light. The footsteps were louder this time, one foot stomping, one dragging, and the door slammed open. I kept my eyes locked on Paula's. Everyone else froze, but Paula blinked. She was red lighting. The voice came again, clearer now, a woman pleading, desperate. "Please, they have to be here. They have to wake me." Paula panicked, her head twitching like a scared deer. A paper bag dropped to the floor with a sharp rustle. Then, suddenly, something grabbed Paula by the neck and lifted her off the ground in one swift motion. I heard her struggling, gasping for air. Her scream changed. It wasn't human anymore. It was raw, animalistic, wild with fear. Bones cracked, sinews snapped, and then silence. A heavy thump as something was dropped into the paper bag. Liquid splattered on the floor. Yes, yes, finally, the voice cried out. Then the clock ticked again. No Paula, no blood, no paper bag. I asked about her later, but no one knew who I was talking about. Paula? What Paula? They said. I couldn't take it. I nearly tripped over a chair as I bolted out of the room. I ran down the hallway, out the back door, through the patch of blue sunflowers the garden club had planted. I knocked over bikes, jumped fences, and finally reached my car. I fumbled with my keys, got in, and sped off without even buckling my seatbelt. I was done. Leaving this town behind seemed like the only way to escape. I took the main street, then a shortcut by Frog Lake. through an old tunnel near the lumber mills and onto the freeway, breaking every traffic law I could without caring. The radio blasted some upbeat pop song about being yourself, but all I wanted was to be someone else, anywhere else. This had to be why Mom taught me to go red light. Something inside us that lets us see and be seen by something we shouldn't. Something that makes us freeze and hide. Then, suddenly, the radio cut out. Red light. My car stalled on the freeway, engine silent. Streetlights shone down like cold stars. I stared straight ahead, heart pounding. On the passenger seat, there was something. A figure with a paper bag in their lap. I heard Paula's voice, weak and muffled. I think this is him," she whispered. "He sees. He can wake me from this nightmare. It's not real. It didn't happen. I'm okay." A finger snapped right next to my ear. My mother used to do that all the time, so I didn't flinch. I just held still, breathing shallow and tight. "Please, just take him, just in case. Then I'll wake up. This'll be over." There was a rustling noise, a stiff neck creaking as a head shook side to side. "Please, someone must wake me. Someone must. Surely." My passenger leaned close, voice dry and strange, lips barely moving. "Hello." My chest ached, my eyes watered, but I stayed still. I imagined that red light in my mind, the one Mom taught me about. I pictured her turning back with a smile, the light changing to green. If I just stayed still, if I just waited, everything would be okay. And somehow, I knew that I'd be fine. You know, it was late last summer when I decided to head north for my brother's wedding. The whole trip was supposed to kick off my vacation, so I thought, why not make a few stops along the way? Nothing fancy, just some camping here, a bit of fishing there. My brother, who's set to stop in Minneapolis, was really eager for us to have a day just shopping together. Honestly, I wasn't feeling it at all. He was caught up in this kind of head-in-the-clouds bliss, all starry-eyed and talking about his perfect future. And I? Well, it just soured my mood. Sometimes it's baffling how your younger sibling can seem to be flying past you in so many ways, right? But I try not to dwell on that. Never mind all that. I was passing through this tiny town in Minnesota when I made my first stop. Fishing. I figured getting away from my brother's infectious grin for a bit would be good. Just me, a six-pack, and endless time stretching out ahead. Perfect deal, right? So, this lake, I remember it ran along the west side of the town and curved gently into a dense patch of woods. There was this little dirt road looping around the back side of the lake, opposite the town itself. Going back through the underbrush would probably take a couple of hours. It was a big lake. The folks at the gas station seemed friendly enough, and I didn't need a fishing license, so I thought, heck, why not? I drove the long way round, parked my car near the trees, grabbed my gear, and started digging along the tree line for bait. Didn't take long to fill the jar. The air was fresh, slightly damp from recent rains, and the sun was mild, just the kind of day you'd want for fishing. I followed the path down to the lake, bait in hand. It was nearly lunchtime. I'd picked up a few sandwiches and a six-pack from the gas station. I had this super comfy camping chair, an audiobook queued up, and nowhere to be for the next 18 hours. Honestly, if I skipped that shopping day with Smiley McGee, yeah, that's what I called my brother in my head, I could even stay an extra day out here. This was my perfect escape. I was genuinely excited. As I approached the lake, I noticed a wooden sign, sort of handmade and painted with big, clear letters. Melonhead. I stopped and stared at it, rereading it a few times. Melonhead? What on earth was that? I snapped a quick picture and kept walking, a little puzzled but intrigued. Getting closer to the water, the croaking of frogs filled the air, not just a few, but a chorus, almost overwhelming. The smell of wet earth and vegetation was strong, thick in the air. But as any outdoors person would tell you, frogs usually mean a healthy ecosystem. I mean, sure, in places like Australia they can be invasive, but here, it felt right. I unpacked my chair on the sandy beach, peeled off my shoes, and set up 2 fishing rods. I stuck them into empty bottles I dug into the sand so I could step back and relax. Leaning back, I cracked open a cold beer and pulled my baseball cap down over my eyes. Will Patton's voice, narrating the Bill Hodges trilogy, quietly filled my ears. I melted into that peaceful moment. That feeling of being alone with nature, with nothing pressing, was exactly what I'd been waiting for all year. I must have dozed off for about an hour because when I woke, I had no clue where the story had left off. My beer had warmed, and the fishing bobbers had drifted back to shore. I got up, reeled in the lines, and reached for my bait jar, only to find it tipped over in the sand, completely empty. Weird. Leaving my gear on the beach, I grabbed my shovel and headed back to the tree line to dig for more bait. It took longer this time, and I had to go a bit deeper into the undergrowth. The frogs had quieted down, and I could see clouds gathering on the horizon, dark and threatening. I wasn't planning to stay the night if it rained. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck in a muddy tent. I could always crash in the car if I had to. When I got back to my chair, a strange feeling crept over me. Something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something had been moved. The peacefulness I felt earlier had shifted, and even though Will Patton's voice was still talking in my ear, it was just noise now. Background chatter I barely heard. Then my phone chimed with a message from my brother. I turned it off and pulled out my headphones. That's when it hit me. All the frogs around me had gone completely silent, just dead quiet. I stood there holding my bait jar, silent wind rustling the birch trees around me, and I couldn't shake the eerie feeling wrapping itself around my chest. Determined, I tried again. I threaded my bait and cast my lines once more. Set the rods, put my headphones back on, and ignored the lukewarm beer. As I rewound the audiobook, I caught sight of a ripple on the lake. Not huge, but definitely there. Maybe a fish surfacing. Maybe this wasn't a lost cause. A few minutes later, the first bobber dipped under the water's surface. Then it popped back up. I held my breath, waiting for the next dip. Moments later, the second bobber dipped too. Fish were definitely biting. But then minutes passed with nothing more. I reeled in the lines and noticed the bait was completely gone from both hooks. Those fish were seriously determined. I switched things up, grabbed a black and blue spinner lure that usually worked on bass, and set it up on my best rod with a spinning reel. I stepped up to the water's edge, took a deep breath, and cast the lure in a smooth, beautiful arc deep into the lake. Half an hour went by, and I was getting into the rhythm. The soft click of the reel, the feel of the line sliding through my fingers. It was nice. Just nice. Then, finally, a bite. Not a big one, but a bite. I hooked it and began reeling in steadily. The fish wasn't pulling or twitching. It was just a steady pull. Probably not big, maybe a pound or so, but something to show for the effort. Maybe a neat little photo for Instagram or Tinder. Hey, don't judge, it works. But then, just as the lure was about halfway back, the line snapped. Not from tension or a sudden jerk. No, it was like someone had just cut it. The line whipped out of the water, and I dropped my rod into the sand, throwing my hands up in disbelief. "What the hell?" I shouted to the empty lake. "What the hell was that?" And there it was, a ripple, out on the lake again. That was enough for me. I packed up quickly, trudged back to my car, and tossed everything into the trunk, even the lukewarm beer. I left the bait jar behind. Those worms were useless now. As I slid into the driver's seat, the first raindrops began pattering softly against the hood, the sound gentle but insistent. Right then, my phone chimed again. Third message from my brother, asking if I'd make it to Minneapolis tomorrow. I groaned aloud. I just couldn't handle that toxic positivity today. I needed space, needed silence. As I started the engine, the radio suddenly flickered on, static buzzing in my ears. The engine roared beneath me, and before I knew it, the speedometer needle was climbing, 75 miles per hour. My car began sliding, swaying dangerously from side to side. Panic surged through me. I lifted my foot off the gas, tried to steer straight, and slowly felt the vehicle lose momentum. After a few tense seconds, I coasted to a stop on the side of the road, my chest heaving with exertion and fear. That could have gone so wrong. Real wrong. 5-car pileup wrong. Needless to say, I moved out of that town not long after. I have this sinking feeling that whatever lurks around Melonhead Lake is looking for people like me. People who are aware, who can see beyond the surface. I'm still piecing it all together, trying to understand what happened that day and what fate befell Paula. It's like she never existed. No online trace, no car, no apartment, nothing. How does the world just forget someone? All I'm saying is that if you've been taught this game with the same intensity as I have, maybe it's for a reason. Just be ready, okay? In case you're aware. You know, I wasn't really planning on spending the night out there, but I figured, hey, I can't back out now and call myself a liar. So I decided I'd just crash in the car, listen to my audiobook, and call it a kind of camping. At least that's what I told myself. I'd packed a tuna sandwich and had a beer that had gone lukewarm by then. Not exactly a gourmet dinner, but honestly, I wasn't in the mood to head back into town. It felt more fitting to just stay put, surrounded by those woods. I slipped my headphones back on, turned off all notifications, and let Will Patton's voice slowly creep back into my mind, weaving through the darkening quiet. As the night stretched on, my beer bottle got lighter and lighter. Around 9 o'clock, after dozing off for a bit and scrolling through my YouTube subscriptions, nature called. I had to take a bathroom break. The woods had swallowed the daylight fast. Suddenly, everything was pitch dark. I didn't have far to go, so I stepped out onto the soft earth, the crunch of dead leaves muffled beneath my boots. I did what I needed, then just stood there, breathing in the cold, damp air. From where I stood, I could see the lake shimmering faintly in the moonlight. And then, I noticed it. A ripple. It wasn't just a little wave. It was bigger. I zipped up quickly and stepped back onto the dirt path, squinting into the shadows by the water's edge. There was something in the lake. Not huge, but definitely there. Something round, maybe the size of a basketball, bobbing gently just beneath the surface. I climbed back in the car, feeling a weird mix of unease and curiosity. I updated my Instagram, a little annoyed I hadn't managed to snag a good fishing shot on the trip, but at least I had that odd sign photo. Maybe someone out there would recognize it. Looking at the picture again, I spotted two things I hadn't noticed before. First, that round shape was visible in the background, right near the lake. And second, at the very top of the sign, a small splash of color caught my eye. It looked like the sign was broken, like actually broken in half. That got me thinking. So I grabbed my phone and followed the dirt path again, this time using the flashlight to look around the sign. The frogs were louder now, their chorus rising with the rain that had started to fall softly. Sure enough, just off the path, I found the other half of the sign. It had snapped clean in two. The words were clear as day. Don't feed. And below that, don't feed Melonhead. I blinked, trying to process. Melonhead? What the hell was that? Then all the pieces started clicking. The bait jar going empty, the bait disappearing from my hooks, my fishing line getting cut like someone or something was messing with me. Was I actually feeding whatever creature Melonhead was? I turned to head back to the car, and that's when I saw it, or him, standing right on the path. I didn't raise my phone or make any sudden moves. I just froze, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The shape was humanoid, but tall, at least 2 heads taller than me, with a hunched back and long webbed fingers. Its breathing was uneven and rattled a large sack in its chest. It dropped my bait jar right in front of me. More. The sound it made was disgusting, a gurgling noise somewhere between a cough and a breath. I slowly picked up the jar and looked up to get a better look. And there it was. A massive, melon-sized head, kind of greenish in tint. That was what had been poking out of the lake all day. I need my shovel, I stammered, panic rising. It's just... More. It stepped closer with a sick squelch sound. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and scrambled into the bushes. I dropped to my hands and knees and started digging frantically with my bare fingers. I clawed at the earth, pulling up thick, sticky clumps of dirt that dripped between my hands. I could feel tiny worms wriggling as I gathered the dirt and worms into the jar. Melonhead leaned over me, breathing heavily, watching. When I held the jar up, it poured the contents over its grotesque face. The creature sifted through the dirt with its tongue and spat the dirt back out, then dropped the jar back beside me. More. Happened, I dug and dug. Time lost all meaning. Every time I filled the jar, it was emptied just as quickly. Hours passed. My nails tore, my fingertips scraped raw against rocks and roots. Every time I slowed, that rattling sound from behind me grew louder, like some enormous rattlesnake ready to strike. I stopped pleading. I just kept digging. Rain soaked me through, chilling me to the bone, but I couldn't tell if my shivers were from cold or pure terror. Eventually, I held up the jar one last time, but this time, Melonhead didn't take it. The sun was quietly rising behind thick, dark clouds. The frogs had gone silent again. My knees cracked painfully as I pushed myself up, fingers trembling and covered in dirt. My clothes were soaked and clung to me. I looked around. No one. Just the empty path and the quiet woods. I leaned against the nearest tree and tried to find some words, but none came. Instead, the tears came. Silent, uncontrolled sobs. When I finally made it back to my car, I plugged in my phone and called the one person I wanted beside me, my brother. I had to get away. I drove without direction, memory foggy and fragmented. I have no idea how I ended up at a gas station or how my brother found me there. But when he did, I felt a flicker of relief. It's taken me a long time to come to terms with what happened that night. At first, I thought I'd lost my mind, that I'd hallucinated everything. I stayed silent, afraid it sounded insane. But I was there, all night, digging on my hands and knees. I wouldn't do that for nothing. I was there, and so was Melonhead. I decided to finally share this after seeing a couple of people post pictures of that same broken sign on Instagram recently. It was still snapped in two, and there, in the background, was that same round shape, bobbing quietly in the water. I don't know what Melonhead is, or what it wants, but if you ever come across that sign, please, just don't feed it. I grew up in a very religious part of the southern United States, so ghost stories were just kind of part of the air. People told them all the time, whether they truly believed them or not. But I believed. And I think I believed because of the things that happened in the house I grew up in. When I was little, I used to see figures in the hallway at night. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Kids see shapes in the dark. Your eyes play tricks on you. That is what I wanted to believe. But then, I saw one closer. One early morning, I woke up on the living room couch. I had fallen asleep there the night before, and when I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was this figure crouched on the back of the couch, leaning over me. People always say, "That sounds like sleep paralysis." But I could move. I moved my arms. I sat up. And only after I sat up did that thing pull back into the shadows. Later that day, I told my older brother Caleb what happened. He got really quiet and started asking questions. He said, "Did it have eyes?" I said, "No, but I could feel it looking at me." Then he asked, "Did it look kind of like a mannequin?" And I said, "Yeah, kind of." He kept asking me little things about how it looked, and then he told me something I had never heard before. He said when he was around 5 or 6, he was sleeping in our parents' room. He woke up and saw 3 of those things on the ceiling, staring down at him with these hollow, mannequin-like eye sockets. He sat up and ran to the bathroom. And while he was running, he said they moved across the ceiling, not into the shadows, but over Mom and Dad. He got so scared he threw up. He told me he never saw them again after that. Those are the only stories I know about those figures, but there were other strange things in that house too. One time, I was in the living room watching a movie with my mom. We had this little camera in my parents' room with a speaker on it, and sometimes my dad would use it to talk to us from there. The speaker was awful. Most of the time it sounded screechy, and at its worst, it came through like a glitchy mumble. So when we heard a weird, crackly voice come through it, we did not think much of it at first. I went to my parents' room and asked my dad what he had said. He looked confused and told me he had not used the camera at all. We thought it was strange, but we tried to brush it off. Then, a few months later, it happened again. Same situation. My mom and I were in the living room, and the camera made that sound again. Except this time, it sounded more like someone talking. It almost sounded like my dad, but not quite. Just close enough to feel wrong. I went and asked him about it again, and again, he said he had not touched it. Another story came from my other older brother, Mason. We were talking one night about how haunted the house felt, and he told me about something that happened when his bedroom door was cracked open. From where he was sitting, he could see a painting in the hallway reflected through the crack. At one point, he looked over and saw one of our relatives in the reflection, standing in the hallway. So he got up and went out there. But the hallway was empty. He went into the living room, and that same relative was sitting on the couch, watching TV. When he asked if they had just been in the hallway, they said they had not gotten up at all. I have more little stories like that, but that is enough for now. I still do not really know what those things were. I do not know why they seem to show up around us, or why they stopped for some people and not others. But if anyone has ever seen something like that, those pale, hollow, mannequin-looking figures, or if anyone knows how to get rid of them, I would honestly love to know. Anyway, thanks for listening. Goodbye for now. I've carried this memory around for most of my life, and honestly, I still don't really know what to do with it. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, something strange used to happen to me at night. Back then, I didn't think of it as frightening or even unusual. I was little, and when something happens often enough at that age, your brain just sort of accepts it as part of the world. I would go to sleep like any normal kid. Nothing dramatic, no bad dreams that I remember, no trouble falling asleep. But sometime in the middle of the night, I would wake up. And I don't mean that hazy kind of waking up where you're still half inside a dream. I remember sitting up in bed and knowing exactly where I was. My bed was against the wall, tucked into the corner of the room. There was a small gap on one side where the moonlight from the window would sometimes spill across the floor. And almost every time this happened, I would turn and see my mom standing beside the bed. At least, it looked like my mom. That's the part that still bothers me. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't some blurry shape in the dark. It looked completely real. Her face, her hair, the way she stood, everything about her looked familiar. But something about it felt wrong. She would just be there, facing me, silent, still. Her expression was always blank, not angry, not kind, not sad, just empty and calm, like she was looking through me instead of at me. I remember reaching out to touch her, and every time, my hand would go right through her. There was no feeling of skin, no warmth, no resistance, nothing. It was like touching air. She looked solid, but she wasn't there in any physical way. Then I would try to call out to her or say something, but I couldn't make a sound. I could open my mouth, I could try to speak, but nothing came out. Not even a whisper. The strangest thing is, I don't remember being scared. That's what makes the memory feel even stranger to me now. I think most children would have cried or screamed, but I didn't. I would just sit there, reaching toward her, trying to speak, waiting for something to change. But nothing ever did. She never moved. She never answered. She never reacted. Eventually, I would get tired of it. Or maybe I'd just feel frustrated in that quiet little kid way. So I would lie back down, turn away, and go to sleep again. This happened over and over. I can't say exactly how many times, but in my memory, it feels like it happened almost every night for a while. I don't remember when it started, and I don't remember when it stopped. One day, it was simply gone from my life. I never told my parents at the time because it didn't occur to me that I should. I thought it was just something that happened at night. Kids can be funny that way. They'll accept the impossible if it shows up often enough. Years later, the memory came back to me, and I realized how bizarre it actually was. As an adult, I've had sleep paralysis a few times, so I've wondered if maybe that's what it was. But it didn't feel the same. With sleep paralysis, I feel trapped in my own body. Back then, I could move. I could sit up. I could reach out. I just couldn't speak, and I couldn't touch her. I've also wondered if it was some kind of dream, but it felt too consistent. The same figure, the same silence, the same blank expression, the same feeling of my hand passing straight through her. I'm a pretty skeptical person, so I don't jump straight to supernatural explanations. But there's still a small part of me that wonders whether I was seeing something my young mind understood as my mom, because that was the closest thing it could make sense of. I don't know. All I know is that I can still picture it clearly, waking up, sitting in the dark, and seeing her there beside my bed, perfectly still, perfectly silent, and somehow not really there at all. Has anyone else ever experienced something like that? Or does anyone have an explanation for what might have been happening? You know, when I was growing up, my family moved around a lot because of my dad's military service. Different towns, different schools, different houses. But there was one place that always stayed the same for us, and that was my grandmother's farm out in the Midwest. It was remote, really remote. Nearly 200 acres, bordered by other farms and stretches of forest land. During the day, it was beautiful. Wide fields, quiet mornings, old trees, that kind of deep country silence that feels almost sacred. But at night, the place changed. The house itself was an old Victorian-style farmhouse. Parts of it had been there since sometime in the 1800s, So by American standards, it had some age on it. And honestly, even people who didn't believe in ghosts felt uncomfortable there. Some of my cousins hated sleeping inside so much that when they visited, they'd rather camp outside in the yard than spend the night in one of the bedrooms. My first clear memory of something strange connected to that house happened when I was about 5. It didn't happen to me directly, but I remember the fear around it. My dad was overseas at the time, and my mom, my little brother, and I were staying near the farm so we could be close to family. My brother Eli was only about a year old then, and he got very sick with a viral infection. My mom was exhausted and worried, so she packed up his playpen and we stayed at my grandmother's house so she could help take care of him. One night, my mom was asleep in the master bedroom, and Eli was in his playpen near the foot of the bed. My mother was always deeply intuitive, almost unsettlingly so, but that's a whole other story. She said she woke up suddenly with this overwhelming feeling that something was wrong. Not a sound, not a dream, just a knowing. She sat straight up in bed and felt, very clearly, that someone was leaning over the playpen, looking down at my brother. She jumped out of bed and rushed over to him, completely convinced that someone was standing there. But when she reached him, the feeling vanished. Eli was asleep, breathing quietly, totally unaware. The next morning, she asked everyone in the house if they had come into the room during the night to check on him. Nobody had. Now, you could say that was just a frightened mother worried about her sick baby. And maybe, on its own, that would make sense. But that was not the only thing that happened in that house. My grandmother and her sister, years apart and on completely separate occasions, both saw the same figure upstairs. They described him the same way. A man in a brown suit, walking along the upper floor like he belonged there. My uncle also used to talk about feeling a presence in the attic. Not seeing anyone exactly, but feeling someone there with him. He was not the dramatic type either. That made it worse somehow. Then there were the sounds. My brother and I both heard them at different times. Loud, deliberate knocking on the outside bedroom walls in the middle of the night. Not random creaks, not branches. Heavy, rhythmic rapping. And these were second-story bedrooms. One of the strangest things happened to Eli years later. He was sleeping downstairs in a room with a large picture window. He woke up and saw 2 golden eyes staring in at him from the darkness outside. Just eyes. No face, no body, nothing else. He believes in the paranormal, but he's also practical. He doesn't exaggerate. And to this day, he says those eyes were real. There was some history to the land, too. We knew that a stillborn baby had once been buried in the front field by a family who owned the property before ours. My grandfather had actually asked that family for permission to move the headstone so he could plant that part of the field. They agreed, because things were different then, though it still gives me a strange feeling to think about. He also found 2 other old headstones nearby, so worn down that nobody could read the names anymore. So we knew there were at least a few graves on the property. After my grandmother passed, the family sold the farm. The new owners later had someone come out and do dowsing in that same front field, where the old headstones had been. According to them, the dowsing suggested there were far more burials than anyone knew. Something like 11 women and 18 men. I don't know what to make of that, but I've always wondered if that field had once been a small, rural cemetery, one that time simply swallowed. Maybe the graves were forgotten. Maybe the people buried there were forgotten too. And maybe some of them became curious about the farmhouse nearby. Curious about the people living there, sleeping there, raising children there. Or maybe they were angry. I don't think we'll ever really know, but I do know this. That farmhouse was the first haunted place I was ever aware of. And strangely enough, it was not the most haunted place I've ever lived. was around 4th grade, my family rented this little house near the shoreline. It always felt cold there, even when the weather wasn't supposed to be. People in the area used to say nobody ever stayed in that house for very long, but at the time, we didn't really take it seriously. We moved in anyway. It was a small place, just 3 bedrooms. When you walked in, the living room was on the left, the kitchen was on the right, and there was this narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms. My parents' room was the one that felt the strangest to me. That was where my parents, my little sister and I all slept together. Our helper slept in another room, and honestly, those 2 rooms were the ones that always felt heavy at night. The room we slept in had a balcony, but it didn't have any railings. That already made everyone nervous, because I used to sleepwalk when I was younger. But beyond that, there was just something about that balcony. It felt wrong, like the air around it was watching. After a few months, we all started getting sick. Not normal sick either. My mom suddenly developed these painful sores around her mouth, so bad she could barely eat. I had this cough that just wouldn't leave. My sister and I kept missing school because one illness would end and another would start. It felt like the house was slowly draining us. By the time I was in 5th grade, my parents decided we needed to move. We were already building our own house on the other side of town, and the moment we started planning to leave, the house seemed to get worse. Termites started appearing from the ceiling, dark ones, just dropping out of nowhere. At night, rats would run above us so loudly that it sounded like something bigger was crawling around up there. One day, we went to visit the land where our new house was going to be built. There was an old wooden house still standing on the property. My dad stayed outside measuring the lot, while my mom, my sister, and I went inside. The place was empty except for one thing: a portrait of Jesus Christ hanging there by itself. I remember staring at it because it felt so random. Just that one portrait in an empty old house. When we went back to the seaside house, I started getting a fever. My mom is a doctor, so she brought me into our room and took care of me. She opened the balcony door because I needed air, and since the house was near the sea, the wind came in strong. I was lying there with a high fever while she watched over me and put dextrose on me, which was normal in our family because, again, Dr. Mom. Eventually, I fell asleep. And this is the part I still remember so clearly, even now. In my dream, everything was black. Not dark like nighttime, but black, like there was nothing around me at all. There was only one light shining above me. Around me were dead people. Some of them were relatives who had already passed away. I recognized my great aunt, the sister of my grandfather, and I also saw my uncle, who had died not long before that. My great aunt reached her hands out to me. She was asking me to come with them. And in the dream, I reached back. But then my mom appeared. She grabbed me and held me so tightly, like she was pulling me away from them with everything she had. She was crying and refusing to let me go. Then I woke up. My mom was actually holding me in real life, crying. I was crying too, completely terrified. She told me I had been sleepwalking and having a bad dream. I was panicking so badly that she had to calm me down. After a while, I settled, but my fever got worse, and a few minutes later, I fell asleep again. That second time was even worse. When I opened my eyes again, my mom was carrying me outside. My dad, my little sister, my grandparents, and our helper were all rushing out too. Everyone was crying. I had no idea what was happening, but they looked so relieved when they saw I was awake. Later, they told me what happened while I was asleep. My little sister had been watching over me while my mom cooked something for me. Suddenly, I started screaming. Not just a normal scream. They said it sounded terrifying. My sister called my mom, and my mom called my dad, our helper, and my grandparents. They all came running into the room and tried to hold me down. My mom placed a small pocket Bible on my clothes, because we're Filipino and religious, and that was just something they believed might help. But they said I reacted badly to it. I kept screaming. The strange thing was, our neighbors lived close by. There was a house behind us, another beside us, and more houses nearby. With how loud everyone said I was screaming, people should have heard us. My grandmother even ran outside shouting for help, but outside, it was silent. No one came. She said it felt like the whole house had been cut off from the world. Then they tried putting a small Jesus bracelet on my wrist, but they said I was suddenly too strong for them. I was screaming, "God, help me, please! There's a hole! There's a hole in the ground!" After they finally got the bracelet onto my wrist, I calmed down. That was when my mom carried me outside, and that was when I woke up confused. A priest came to the house after that. According to him, the hole I kept screaming about reminded him of a hole in an abandoned place nearby, somewhere people in the area already thought was disturbing. They ended up covering it. Later, our helper looked at my fingers and asked, "Is it still there?" I asked her, "What was there?" And she said, "There was something black on your fingers." I still don't know what she meant by that. There were other things about that place too. Near the sea, there was a large tree with a rope still hanging from it. We were told that a man had taken his own life there years before. There was also a dark little river beside the house where I used to play, because I was just a kid and didn't really understand danger the way adults do. People kept saying families never lasted long in that house. After we moved out, another family stayed there, but they left too because their son kept getting sick every day. The strange part is that the actual owners of the house live there now, and they're fine. No sickness, no experiences, nothing. So later on, we wondered if whatever was in that house only wanted their own family there. Maybe it didn't like outsiders staying under that roof. And one more thing still bothers me. After everything happened, people finally started appearing outside again. My grandmother asked the neighbors why they didn't come when she screamed for help. They said they never heard anything. They were outside the whole time, just talking and hanging around nearby, and according to them, our house had been completely quiet. But inside, we had been screaming. To this day, whenever I think about that house by the water, I still feel that same cold feeling come back. I used to work at a zoo in my hometown, around 2016 to 2018. And I wish I could tell you I was a zookeeper, because honestly, I probably would have stayed much longer if that had been the case. But no, I worked in park services. That meant I was part of the team that kept the whole place clean. Trash cans, bathrooms, offices, pathways, classrooms, supply closets, all of it. We also helped set up for special events and delivered stock to different areas around the zoo. When I first started, I was on the evening shift, usually from about 4:30 in the afternoon until 11 at night. That was kind of the unspoken ladder there. You did your time as part-time night staff before you had a real shot at a full-time day position. I didn't mind though. I mean, not many people get to see what a zoo feels like after it closes. For the first several weeks, it was mostly just me out there. Me, my flashlight, my little utility cart full of cleaning supplies, 2 security guards somewhere on patrol, and my supervisor only showing up if there was some deep cleaning job that needed extra hands. And this zoo was huge, over 100 acres. Now, a zoo at night is already strange, even before anything spooky happens. The animals are louder than you'd expect. The big cats especially. The lions and tigers would call out from opposite ends of the zoo, and their roars would roll through the dark like thunder with teeth. Then there was the bamboo in the Asia section. When the wind moved through it, the stalks would knock together with this hollow clacking sound. It wasn't supernatural, I knew that. But when you're alone, pushing a trash cart through a dark pathway, your brain starts lighting candles in rooms you didn't know it had. Still, Most of that had an explanation. Animals, wind, old buildings, night noises. But there were 3 places in that zoo that never felt right. The first was the Grand Lawn. It was this wide, grassy area that stayed roped off most of the time. They only opened it for weddings, fundraisers, and private events. At night, it was just this empty stretch of lawn sitting across from the main restaurant. I had to go into that restaurant almost every night to clean the bathrooms. And every time I stood there unlocking the door, I'd glance over my shoulder. I always felt like someone was watching me from the lawn. Not in a vague way either. It felt focused, patient, like someone standing just far enough back in the dark to avoid being seen. Sometimes I thought I heard movement out there, soft steps in the grass, fabric shifting, little things that made me pause with my key still in the lock. One night, one of the security guards came up to me and asked, "Does that lawn ever bother you?" I felt so relieved when she said it. I told her, "Yes, I thought it was just me." Then she asked, very casually, "Have you seen the Top Hat Man yet?" I just looked at her. She told me she'd seen him a few times out there, an old-fashioned looking man standing on the grand lawn, wearing a dark coat and a tall hat. Once, when she was locking up the restaurant, she said she saw his reflection in the glass behind her. When she turned around, nobody was there. She didn't say it like she was trying to scare me. That was the part that got me. She sounded calm about it, almost respectful. She said she didn't think he meant any harm. She figured he was just curious about people. I never saw him myself, but I'll tell you this. I felt watched in that area long before she ever mentioned him. The second place was the administration building. That was where the office staff worked during the day. I only had to go in a few times a week to clean the bathrooms, vacuum if needed, and empty the trash cans at everyone's desks. An empty office building at night already feels weird. All those cubicles sitting there, computers asleep, chairs tucked in, family photos staring out from desks. It feels like the building is pretending to be normal, and the lights were motion activated. So I'd walk into one room and the lights would click on. Fine, that made sense. But sometimes, a light would turn on in an office down the hall when I knew I was the only person in the building. Other times, something would tip over far away from me. Not crash dramatically, just enough noise to make me stop and listen. Security showed me a couple of camera clips once. One showed a trash can falling over by itself. Nothing touched it. No person, no animal, no visible reason. The strangest clip showed what looked like a transparent figure walking past the cubicles in the main office area. I know how that sounds. I really do. But the guards weren't laughing when they showed it to me. They said the zoo didn't want that kind of footage getting out. Bad publicity, basically. They wanted people visiting for the animals, not showing up because they thought the place was haunted. And honestly, I get it. The last thing any zoo needs is a bunch of ghost hunters begging for midnight tours. The third place was the Children's Learning Center. During the day, it was used for field trips, summer camp, and little educational programs. At night, it was mostly quiet except for a small office with a program coordinators worked during regular hours. My job there was simple. Bathrooms, trash, floors, lockup. But that building had a heavy feeling to it. The lights flickered more than they should have. Not constantly, just enough to make you notice. And I almost always felt like someone was standing somewhere just outside my line of sight. I don't scare easily, so I mostly ignored it. I'd clean, lock the door, radio security to let them know I was leaving the area, and move on. There was one night, though, that really got under my skin, and it didn't even happen in one of those 3 places. I was in the break room having a quick meal when security called me over the radio and asked me to confirm my location. I told them I was in the break room. Then they asked, "Were you just near the koi pond?" I hadn't been. There was no reason for me to be over there either. No bathrooms nearby. Nothing for me to clean at that time of night. They told me to stay where I was until they cleared the area. My supervisor was off that night, so it was just me and the 2 guards in the whole zoo. They searched around and didn't find anyone. Maybe it was a person who slipped in somehow. Maybe it was something else. I don't know. But the thought of someone wandering around that zoo in the dark bothered me more than I expected. Eventually, I got promoted to a daytime position. Better hours, better pay, though still not enough to keep me there forever. Zoo work, from what I saw, is often underpaid across the board. Before I left the night shift completely, I helped train the new evening person. She seemed calm at first, pretty laid back, easy to talk to. I thought she'd be fine. Then one evening, after I had already clocked out, she came into the break room looking genuinely scared. She asked if I could stay with her while she cleaned the Children's Learning Center. I really needed to get home, so I asked her what happened. She said she hated that building. She felt watched. She kept seeing shadows out of the corners of her eyes, and there was a light flickering near the entryway that had her completely rattled. I walked over with her that night and checked the whole building. Nothing was there. At least, nothing I could point to. I told her, gently, that the building had always felt strange and that she might get used to it with time. But I also told her I couldn't do that every night. I had people waiting for me at home, and I wasn't being paid to stay late as an escort. I'll admit, seeing her that scared made me think about how much I had gotten used to. To me, that zoo was eerie, sure, but manageable. Compared to other strange things I've experienced in my life, it was almost quiet. But not everyone has that kind of tolerance for the unexplained. And honestly, I don't blame her. When you work nights alone, especially in a place that goes completely still after dark, you learn pretty quickly that the job description doesn't tell you everything. She lasted about a month before finding a daytime job somewhere else, and I've never blamed her for that either. I know people say things like this all the time, and I understand how it sounds, I really do. Maybe I'm wrong about what was happening in that house. Maybe there's some neat little explanation for all of it. But I'll tell you this much. I moved out almost 6 years ago, and nothing like it has happened to me since. Not once. I didn't know much about the history of the town when we lived there. I'd heard little rumors, the kind people pass around without really knowing where they started. Stories about old burial grounds near the school, forgotten cemeteries in the woods, places nobody really talked about. I never looked too deeply into any of it. We had lived in another house in that area before, and that place was completely normal. Nothing strange, nothing heavy, just a house. But the second house was different. It was a decent-sized place with several acres of woods behind it, maybe 3 or 4. And I never went into those woods. Not once. I couldn't explain it at the time, but they felt wrong. Even in the middle of the day, even when there was nothing there to see, those trees made my whole body tense up. That house had this feeling to it, like it was waiting. We moved in around 2016, when I was about 12. I got the upstairs room with a loft area that looked down over the living room. At first, everything seemed fine. We unpacked, met the neighbors, settled into a routine. It was me, my mom, my stepdad, my 2 brothers, 2 dogs, and a cat. Then my mom's dog started acting strange. At first, we laughed it off. He kept charging straight into the sliding glass door like he didn't understand it was there. Then he started running into walls, hard enough that it stopped being funny. My stepdad's dog was completely fine, which made it feel even stranger. Our cat hated the house. He escaped constantly, and when he finally came back, he stuck close to me like I was the only safe thing in the place. Over time, we brought home more animals. More dogs, more cats, chickens later on. And things just kept happening. One cat died within days. Another ran off. A dog was hit by a car. It started to feel like nothing living could stay safe there for long. And then it started happening to me. I began falling all the time. Downstairs, off the porch, getting out of cars. I sprained my wrists and ankles over and over. One fall was bad enough that I broke my wrist. Before that house, I had never had balance problems. After leaving that house, I haven't had them either. Then came the feeling of being watched. It was strongest near the woods, but eventually I felt it inside too. I started staying indoors as much as possible. I put blackout curtains over my upstairs windows because I couldn't shake the feeling that something was looking in at me while I slept. When I had cats sleeping in my room, things were quieter. But on nights when they weren't there, I would wake up in impossible positions. Upside down on the bed, halfway hanging off, my head where my feet should have been. Sometimes my stuffed animals or pillows would be thrown across the room. I got scared enough that I downloaded one of those sleep recording apps. For the first few weeks, it was mostly normal. Sheets rustling, me mumbling in my sleep. Then I started hearing whispers. I still have some of those recordings. The worst part is that the whispers sound like my voice, but not the way I normally talk in my sleep. They overlap, soft and close, like someone is speaking right next to the phone. I still record myself sleeping every now and then, just to reassure myself. There are no whispers now. There was one night I still call sleep paralysis, because I don't know what else to call it. It only happened once. I was about 14. I woke up facing my closet, and there was a woman standing there. She wasn't some dark shape. She wasn't the kind of thing people usually describe. She was bright, almost golden yellow, but not comforting, not warm. There was something deeply wrong about her. I couldn't move, couldn't look away, couldn't speak. She just stood there, staring at me. It felt like hours. After that, everything got worse. Posters and paintings started falling off my walls. Things in my room would be moved around. At first, I tried to blame my family, but then I noticed clothes in my closet had been rearranged too, and that didn't make sense. I was exhausted all the time. I kept getting hurt. I kept feeling weaker. I know somebody might say mold or stress or a clumsy teenager with an overactive imagination. I've thought about that too. But mold doesn't growl at you from outside the house. Mold doesn't whisper into your ear at night. Outside, I started finding bones. Not bodies. Not remains with fur or skin. Clean bones. Our chickens would be slaughtered, and there would be blood everywhere. My mom blamed animals, maybe a possum or something. And maybe that would have made sense if I hadn't also found a possum skull picked completely clean. I started keeping the bones I found. I know that sounds strange, but at the time, I think I was trying to understand it. Or maybe appease it. I was a scared kid trying to make rules for something that didn't seem to have any. Then one of my cats died. Its body was left in the front yard where I would see it. Other animals died too. Dogs ended up near the river across the road. Animals that had never run off before suddenly disappeared or got hurt. It felt like the house took everything it could reach. And while no person died inside that house while we lived there, a lot of family members died during those years. Too many funerals in too short a time. It was like grief kept circling us. One of our older dogs nearly died falling off the porch, almost exactly the way I used to fall. She landed on a piece of wood and was impaled by it. Somehow, she survived. But I remember looking at her and thinking, that could have been me. The pool was bad too. Whenever I swam alone, I felt like something was pulling me down. Not a cramp, not panic, a pressure, a dragging feeling. If my family was outside with me, it stopped. That was the pattern. It only seemed to happen when I was alone. No growling when my brothers were nearby. No waking up moved when the cat slept with me. No strange feeling when other people were close. But alone? That house noticed. One day, when I was around 15, I was home by myself. I saw someone come from the direction of the neighbor's yard and walk up to our sliding glass door. Not the front door, the side door. And I don't know how to explain this, but the way they moved was wrong. They knocked on the glass, just stood there, waiting. I knew the doors were locked because I had locked them. I didn't answer. I hid and called my mom. It was daylight, which almost made it worse. I knew our neighbors. They wouldn't come over like that, especially with no car in the driveway. And whoever or whatever that was, it didn't feel like a neighbor. We were getting close to moving out by then. I think the house knew. One of the last nights there, I heard scratching at my bedroom door and my window. The hallway light outside my room was on, and I could see a shadow pacing back and forth. I heard tapping on the roof, too, slow and patient. My door had a lock, thank God. All the cats were gone by then. The only dog left was too heavy and old to climb the stairs, and the stairs were blocked with moving boxes anyway. Nothing should have been upstairs with me. After we moved, it was like someone opened a window in my life. I stopped falling. I stopped waking up bruised or scratched. I stopped having nightmares. I started going outside again. I don't feel watched anymore. I don't even keep curtains on my windows now. None of my new pets have died suddenly. No more sleep paralysis. No more whispers. No more feeling like something is waiting for me to be alone. My parents almost split up while we lived in that house. After they moved out, that stopped too. Just like that. So yes, I blame the house. Whatever was there, it felt hungry. It felt like it was slowly draining everything that stepped inside. Animals, people, the whole family. I don't know what happened on that land, and I don't know what was in those woods. I only know that I will never go back. And whoever lives there now, I genuinely hope they're safe. I hope they fixed whatever was wrong with that place. Or, I hope it finally left them alone. Hi everyone. I'm still a little shaken up by what happened, so forgive me if some of the details come out a bit scattered. This happened late last night, sometime after 1 in the morning. My friend Mira and I had gone out to look at the stars. There's this open field near my place, right beside an old cemetery. I actually live just across from it, so I'm used to seeing it there. It usually doesn't bother me. At first, everything felt calm. The sky was clear, and the field was quiet. But then I heard something coming from the cemetery. It was this faint rattling sound, almost like one of those little baby toys, mixed with a slow, dragging noise. A shuffle. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just the trees moving, but there was no wind at all that night. Not even a small breeze. I asked Mira to stop talking for a second and listen, but she didn't hear anything. So I brushed it off, even though it didn't sit right with me. A couple minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it sounded farther down near the edge of the cemetery. The same dragging shuffle, slow and uneven. I told Mira to be quiet again, but she still didn't hear it. I tried to ignore it, but then I got this warm, crawling shiver down my back. Not cold. Warm. That somehow made it worse. Then, maybe a minute later, the shuffling was right behind us. That time, Mira heard something too, but she said she heard the rattling, not the footsteps. We both panicked and ran. As we were running, I swear I could hear the shuffling moving across the field after us, like something was cutting diagonally toward where we were going. Mira didn't hear that part, but I did, and it sounded like it was getting faster. We made it to the corner near the road and stopped for a moment to catch our breath. We sat down, trying to calm ourselves and make sense of it. Then I heard the shuffling again, very faintly. I looked back toward the field, and that same awful shiver ran through me. I called Mira's name, trying to get her attention, and right then she suddenly jerked to her left, like something had startled her. A few seconds later, she did it again. Then I felt something brush past me. Not hard. Not like someone grabbing me, just a quick touch, enough to make every part of me want to leave. So we did. We got out of there completely. We tried to talk ourselves through every logical explanation afterward. Wind didn't make sense because the air had been still all night. Branches didn't make sense either, because there aren't many trees around that part of the cemetery or the field. I wondered if maybe it could have been an animal, maybe even a snake, but the sound wasn't like that. It sounded like someone dragging their feet, then suddenly picking up speed. And the part that still bothers me is this. Mira felt something touch her left shoulder, but I was standing on her right. So whatever brushed against her, it wasn't me. Hey, so this happened a few years back, but something recently brought it all rushing back to me. I've been filming a small project in the woods near where I live, and being out there again reminded me of this strange night with my friend, Kieran. Back then, we had built this little makeshift shack in a patch of woodland near our neighborhood. It wasn't anything impressive, just boards, branches, and whatever we could find, but it became this place where we'd sometimes go and sit at night. I don't even know why, really. It just felt like our spot. One night, we were in there pretty late, probably around 11. We were messing around, laughing, playing music quietly, and doing this awful imitation of a song. I think it might have been Crazy Train, but honestly, we were butchering it so badly it barely sounded like music. We were sort of dragging out the notes in these ridiculous moaning voices, just being idiots. And then, from right outside the shack, something copied us. It was close. I mean, it sounded like it was standing just beside the wall. One long shout or moan in almost the exact same tone we had been doing. Not like an animal noise, not like wind. It sounded like someone mocking us. We both went completely silent. I remember the feeling so clearly. All the warmth left the place. We turned off the music, killed the lights, and just sat there, barely breathing, listening for footsteps or laughter or anything that would make it make sense. There was nothing. After a minute or so, we worked up the nerve to step outside and look around. We checked the area near the shack, shone lights into the trees, listened for movement. Nothing. No animals that we could see, no people, no sound of anyone running off after a prank. Just the trees, the dark, and that horrible feeling that something had been right there with us. The thing is, nobody goes into those woods that late. Our neighborhood is mostly older people, and if anyone walks their dog, it's during the day or early evening. We were deep enough in that you'd have to really mean to be there. We left right after that. I've tried to explain it over the years. I've looked into all kinds of things, from strange wildlife calls to paranormal stories, skinwalker legends, wendigos, witches, all of it. I'm not saying I believe it was any one of those things. I just genuinely don't know what we heard. And the strangest part is, it wasn't just us. A few weeks ago, my mom called me while she was walking home past that same woodland because she could hear shouting coming from inside the trees. My sister told me she's heard it too while walking through there, and it scared her enough that she changed paths just to avoid getting closer to the noise. So I don't know what's out there, but I know what I heard that night. Something outside that shack copied our voices. I'm older now, and this happened to me about 10 years ago. I'm not telling this because I want attention or sympathy or anything like that. I'm sharing it because if someone out there is dealing with something similar, I want them to know they're not alone. and maybe my experience can help. I really did speak with something. That's the part I still struggle to say out loud, because whatever it was, it looked human enough to make the memory feel even worse now. At first, it seemed kind. Curious even. I actually recorded the first time it happened, but I haven't been able to watch that video again. I still have it saved on an old flash drive somewhere. The first time it appeared, I think it was just as shocked as I was. It said beings like it usually couldn't communicate with us. But somehow, through my friend Marcos while he was asleep, it could speak. And I need to be clear about something. This was not sleepwalking. It was not my friend pretending. This thing had its own personality, its own way of speaking, its own tone of voice. It used different words than Marcos did. It had different opinions, different likes and dislikes. I know how strange that sounds, and you can believe me or not, but I'm completely sure it wasn't a prank. Somehow, as impossible as it sounds, we became friends. A paranormal friendship. That's the only way I can describe it. Over time, it seemed to gain more control over Marcos's body. It would come and go whenever it wanted. At first, I didn't see it as a problem. It would ask if it could come with me to grab a beer or sit outside while I smoked a cigarette. Then, just like that, Marcos would come back, confused, with no memory of what had happened. That was one of the hardest parts. Marcos couldn't remember anything from the times this thing was in control. But eventually, he believed me. It took a lot to convince him, and I don't blame him for that. How do you tell your friend that something else is using his body? About a year passed, and things started changing. The thing told me that the angels wanted to destroy it. It said what it was doing was not allowed. That was when it finally told me what it was. It said it was a demon. But then it told me not to be afraid. It said it was like me, like anyone else, just trying to exist. And I wanted to believe that. I really did. Because when I spoke to it, all I saw was my friend's face, my friend's hands, my friend's body sitting across from me. Only the person behind the eyes was different. That was when everything began to fall apart. I'm not ready to say more than that right now. Part of me still feels trapped back there, and even after all these years, it hurts to remember. English also isn't my first language, so explaining it properly is difficult. But if anyone listening to this is going through something like it, please reach out. I know how impossible it feels. I know how alone it can make you feel. And I know how to help. This happened a little less than a year ago, around late summer, right before my older brother, Evan, got married. He and his fiancée, Mara, wanted to do something a little different. So instead of separate bachelor and bachelorette parties, they planned one big shared weekend in the mountains near Gatlinburg, Tennessee. There were around 14 of us altogether, and we rented this big cabin tucked away in the woods. It had that beautiful postcard kind of view, but from the moment I stepped out of the car, something about the place felt heavy. I tried to ignore it. I've always been a little sensitive to things I can't explain. Sometimes I'll catch what looks like a shadowy figure out of the corner of my eye, but it's always gone almost instantly. I also deal with anxiety, so I've spent most of my life telling myself it's just my brain misfiring. Maybe it is sometimes, but I've never been totally sure. The cabin itself was huge. There was a loft upstairs with a pull-out couch outside the master bedroom, a few bedrooms on the main floor, and a basement with bunk beds and a king bed. Since I was the youngest and didn't really want to share a bed with anyone, I took the pull-out couch in the loft. I didn't love it. There was no door, and I felt exposed up there. But for the first couple of nights, nothing really happened. Everyone was drinking, laughing, playing games, and doing normal wedding trip stuff. Then Sunday came. Most of the group had already left, so there were only 9 of us still there. Mara wanted to go hiking, so 5 of us went. Her, Evan, me, and 2 of the bridesmaids. The others stayed behind at the cabin or went into town to shop. We didn't really have a solid plan, so we stopped at a visitor center to ask about trails. The hike Mara originally wanted to do was closed because a mudslide had blocked the road, so we just started driving around, hoping we'd find something. Eventually, we lost cell service and found this small trail marker off the road. It looked short enough, so we decided to try it. I already don't love hiking. I'm allergic to everything, and I was mostly thinking about snakes, bears, poison ivy, and all the other woodland nightmares my brain could invent. The trail was only about 1/3 of a mile, but it got steep near the end. And that's where the feeling changed. At the top of the hill, the trail opened into an old gravesite. Not a cemetery with neat rows or anything like that. It was more like a forgotten burial ground. Some graves had worn-down stones, others barely had markers at all. The clearing was oval-shaped, with the trees pushed back around it, almost like the woods were refusing to come any closer. The strangest part is how I remember the trees. I don't remember seeing into the forest beyond the clearing. In my mind, everything outside that little space was dark, almost covered in black fog. The trail was visible, and the graves were visible, but past that, it felt like the world just stopped. I don't know whether it actually looked that way in the moment, or if that's how my memory painted it afterward, but I know how it felt. Wrong. I wanted to leave immediately. I didn't see anything while we were standing there, but I felt watched. Not in a curious way, in a way that made my skin feel too tight. After a while, everyone finished looking around, and we headed back down the trail. On the way down, I caught a dark shape moving in my peripheral vision. Just for a second. I turned, and of course, nothing was there. The rest of the afternoon was normal enough. We got back to the cabin later and started talking with the others about what we'd done. The 4 who stayed behind were 2 couples. I'll call them Sam and Kara, and Liv and Jonah. That's when they told us something weird had happened while we were gone. They said they had all been in the cabin together, within sight of each other, when Kara heard Sam's voice calling from another room. But Sam was sitting right beside her, and he heard it too. Nobody went to check. They all just froze, decided they didn't want to know, and ignored it. After that, we told them about the trail and the gravesite, and the whole room got quieter. Then, in the middle of a pause, Evan suddenly turned his body to the side, like he was letting someone walk behind him. But no one was there. He looked confused and said he'd heard someone say, "Excuse me," right behind him, like they were trying to squeeze past. Mara immediately told him to stop messing around. She thought he was trying to scare everyone. But I was staring at the spot behind him, because when he moved, I saw someone there. Not clearly, not like a normal person. More like a figure-shaped shadow, standing close enough that he would have felt it pass. So I said, "He's not lying. Something was there." Everyone got tense after that. The conversation sort of fell apart, and even the people who were laughing before didn't seem comfortable anymore. A little later, Evan came and sat beside me. His voice was lower when he asked, "Did you really see someone behind me?" I told him yes. That's when his face changed. He told me he had made the whole thing up. He hadn't heard anyone say "excuse me." He was just trying to scare the group. But I had seen something exactly where he pretended something was, and that scared him more than anything else. Nothing else happened that night. We all eventually went to bed, though I don't think anyone slept very peacefully. By morning, everything felt normal again. Sunlight has a funny way of making you question yourself, but I still think about that cabin. I think about the old gravesite, the dark woods around it, the voice calling from an empty room, and the figure I saw behind my brother when there should have been nothing there. And honestly, I don't know what followed us back from that trail, but I'm pretty sure something did. I want to lay everything out honestly, because I think the context matters. And I hope you'll hear me through this, because I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but part of me wonders if what I've been calling mania might actually be severe depression mixed with alcohol use, stress, and maybe something closer to BPD. I don't know. I'm not trying to diagnose myself in circles, but I know I've never really experienced anything I would call psychosis before. Not until recently. And the alcohol has gotten worse. Bad enough that I'm planning to go to detox tomorrow. Honestly, this experience is one of the biggest reasons. It scared me that much. It made me wonder if my drinking is starting to push my mind into places I can't control. For the last couple of months, I've also been taking care of my boyfriend Eli while he was in psychosis. He's stable now, thankfully, but it was intense. After he came out of it, I asked him what he thought had happened to him, because he's been diagnosed bipolar after hospital visits. He called it spiritual psychosis. Not long after that, we had a conversation about everything. He had read some of my journal, and I'll admit, I'd been writing in a way that felt a little scattered and strange. He told me it reminded him of how he wrote when he was manic. He thought maybe I should go get help, but I got emotional, and instead we ended up stepping outside, smoking a cigarette, and talking for a while. Some of what he told me was hard to follow, but some of it felt strangely clear. He talked about his parents, especially his father, who hasn't really been around since Eli was young. He said there had been some kind of fight or incident when he was little, something his mom had told him about, where things got almost conjuring-like. He described objects being thrown around the room and said his whole family became very religious after that, very focused on Jesus, almost like they were trying to protect themselves from something evil. At first, he sounded like he was making sense. Then suddenly, he didn't. It was like the conversation started touching something that pulled him backward. He said he had already said too much. He also mentioned there being some kind of unspoken rule about not talking about these things with him. His mother had said something similar before. She told me that right before his second hospital trip, she had gone over to get him because I had left after he became really mean and frightening toward me. She said he was throwing things, hurting the dog, and that there was the devil in his eyes. Another time, she mentioned a bipolar man she had dated and said she had seen that same look in his eyes too. I don't know for sure, but now I wonder if she was talking about Eli's father. During the beginning of Eli's episode, he also kept saying strange things about a transition that was supposed to have happened already, but had been delayed. He kept trying to convince me to stay awake with him for days, and more than once, he referred to himself as the devil. Then, today happened. I've already felt off for a couple of weeks, but until now it hadn't felt terrifying. More like stress, alcohol, and maybe a mild episode of something. But this morning, I woke up filled with fear. When I tried to fall back asleep, I kept hearing these wheels. That's the best way I can describe it. Wheels. Almost wooden, like a little toy cart rolling across the floor. It sounded like it was right in front of the bed, moving from one side of the room to the other. Every time I got close to sleep, the sound would get louder and louder until I opened my eyes or moved my body. Then it would stop. That happened over and over, maybe 12 times, maybe more. When I finally fell asleep, I had a string of nightmares. 3 or 4, maybe 5. In almost all of them, I was afraid of Eli and trying to get to his mother for help. Most of the details are blurry now, but the last dream is the one that shook me the most. In the dream, we woke up in bed. Eli tried to get up, and I reached for him, like I needed to say something. Then he started vomiting blue and green. Not a lot, but enough to scare me. The next thing I remember, he was lying on his side on the bed, still vomiting, and I froze for a second before turning him properly so he wouldn't choke. Then I ran to the kitchen. He came in after me, but he looked vacant, almost catatonic. I ended up pressed against the wall, almost floating, but not like he was doing it to me. It felt more like my own body was trying to get away from him. After that, I ran to his mother's room. She was in bed, and there was this large bucket nearby. I sat in it and started vomiting feces. Then I lost control of my bowels completely. It was humiliating and horrifying, and by the end, the bucket was full. It was big enough for me to sit in, so that image has stayed with me. There were other details too, but those are the parts that felt the darkest. The parts that made me wake up feeling like something was wrong beyond just a nightmare. When I woke up, I started Googling. I know that probably wasn't the best idea, but I was scared and trying to stay self-aware. I searched whether hearing wheel sounds is common with hallucinations, and what I found didn't really comfort me. Then I searched whether wheel sounds show up in demonic experiences, and that made me spiral even more, because apparently people do associate them with darker hauntings or poltergeist-type experiences. At first, I tried to explain it as alcohol. I took a shot and felt a little better, which made me think maybe it really was withdrawal or anxiety, or my brain reacting to the drinking. But the more I think about it, the more I keep circling back to everything Eli said. The things his mother said, the dreams, the sounds, the fear. And I don't know what I believe right now. I don't know if this is my mind under stress, alcohol pulling me into something dangerous, or something deeper that I don't understand. I just know that it scared me enough to finally admit I need help. So, this all started about 8 years ago. I was younger, and honestly, I didn't really understand what I was getting into. A few friends and I played with a Ouija board in an old cemetery one night. At the time, it felt like we were just messing around, trying to scare ourselves a little. But after that, things seemed to shift in ways I still have a hard time explaining. One of the friends who was there, Lance, later passed away, and the rest of us, in different ways, started struggling. Addiction, depression, anxiety, compulsions, all these heavy things that seem to creep into our lives and stay there. Then, not long ago, I stayed up late watching Interstellar. I remember being really caught up in the whole idea of dimensions in time and traveling beyond what we understand. The movie ended at exactly 3:33 in the morning. The next night, I woke up at 3:33 again, and when I opened my eyes, it didn't feel like I was in my room anymore. It felt like I had been taken somewhere else, deep in a forest. There were people standing around me in black robes, wearing animal skulls, holding books, and chanting over my body. I was terrified. Then my friend came back into the room, and something changed. It felt like this pink light or aura pushed everything away from me. She had been blessed once at the Sistine Chapel, and in that moment, I genuinely felt like whatever was around me couldn't stay near her. The next night, I was alone, and my room changed. Everything looked the same, but the color was wrong. The whole room had this reddish-orange glow, almost like I was somewhere else, wearing the shape of my own bedroom. I was still on a Discord call, and I could see my friends' icons, but I couldn't hear them. I felt disconnected from everything. Then my body started feeling wrong too. It felt like my organs were failing or burning from the inside. But the moment my friend called me, it stopped. A few days later, on February 6th, 2025, I went through something even worse. I had overdosed and went into cardiac arrest. Again, I felt that same burning inside, like my organs were boiling. My friend's girlfriend put a rosary around my neck and started praying to Jesus and Saint Michael. She opened the windows and I swear, I felt a massive weight lift off me. The pain inside my body stopped. Then it felt like something detached from me and left through the window. After that, something in me changed. My depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts were suddenly gone. I hadn't felt that light since I was a kid. It was like I could breathe again for the first time in years. And the Saint Michael connections kept showing up. A couple weeks before all of this, I had bought a Saint Michael pendant online just because I thought it looked cool. After everything happened, I went back to the website and the listing was gone. Around that same time, I randomly saw a Saint Michael tattoo at work and took a picture of it. I'd also unknowingly sent Saint Michael art and tattoo designs to friends on Instagram weeks earlier. Back in 2023, I had wanted to get a demonic summoning circle tattoo, but then an affirmation app sent me a message that said, "When I didn't know better," and I decided not to do it. That same year, I saved a tattoo image of Saint Michael fighting the devil, again just thinking it looked cool. I didn't even really know who Saint Michael was back then. Then I realized something else. My son's name is Eden, and Saint Michael is connected to guarding Eden. Even stranger, when my son was born, my ex-girlfriend shaman gave her a painting of Saint Michael that said, "Eden, may angels keep watch." Then, on February 9th, 2025, I met a girl who told me that the same demon that killed Lance had attacked her too. That day she cut my hair, and it felt deeply uncomfortable afterward, almost like there had been some kind of spiritual transfer. We FaceTimed the mother of my child, and she said right away that the girl had a strange energy about her. Then my rosary broke. Later, the girl said she wanted to take my soul. She talked about wanting control over me. She wanted to have sex, but we didn't. I sent her home in an Uber. After that, I prayed several times and put salt around my room while praying. At first, my son was crying and panicking, but once I finished, he calmed down. That same day, my son grabbed his rosary and started yelling, "Shut up, monster," over and over. He was only 2 years old. He had never really been exposed to religion like that, so I still don't know how to explain it. Then, his tablet randomly autoplayed a demonic-looking video, which shook me even more. The next day, on February 10th, I took him to my friend's house, the same place where I felt that thing leave my body. My son was asleep, but then he woke up terrified. He cried for about 20 minutes, pointing at something none of us could see. My friend's girlfriend started praying, and my son suddenly got quiet. He looked dizzy, and his eyes moved side to side. Then, after a while, he ate like nothing had happened. I thanked the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit for sending Saint Michael to help me through it. On February 11th, my son and I prayed together for the first time. I played a powerful prayer for removing evil, and before it started, he didn't have a mark on his face. Afterward, there was a scratch there. Later, I went to St. Michael Catholic Church and was anointed with holy oil. Even after that, I still had spiritual attacks and dreams about exorcisms. Around March 2025, I was with some friends when I suddenly felt completely paralyzed. I saw a figure that was darker than anything I'd ever seen, like the blackest black, with round, lifeless eyes. It tried to crawl onto my body, and I tried praying it away. Then the dreams started. For 3 nights in a row, I dreamed I was performing exorcisms as a priest. The first time, I woke up scared, but each night in the dream, I became more confident. I prayed more strongly in Jesus' name. By the last dream, I woke up feeling peaceful instead of afraid. Then, on October 11th, 2025, I was at a rave. At some point, I fell into confusion. I heard many voices, and everything around me felt sinister. I grabbed my rosary, opened my notes app, and tried reciting the St. Michael prayer. Every time I tried to say it, the words became clearer. Then I invoked Jesus' name, and suddenly I noticed how dark and strange everything around me felt. Afterward, I became extremely nauseous. The night after that, I confessed my sins in prayer before going to sleep. I dreamed I was running from authority, and at the end, I was caught by a bright light. I woke up near 3 a.m., but this time I felt peace. I still have pictures from during or right after some of these moments. They're personal, so I don't really share them. But I know what I felt. I know how heavy life was before, and I know how different it felt after that prayer. Whatever happened, it changed me, and ever since then, I've felt like St. Michael has been part of the battle, standing between me and something I was never meant to face alone. I guess I should start by saying this house has always felt occupied. Not crowded in a normal way, not like a busy family home. More like there are corners here that remember people, corners that keep breathing after everyone else has gone quiet. The house is old, around 50 years now. My grandparents built it, and over time, different relatives, tenants, and families have lived here with us. As far as I know, only 2 people have actually passed away inside the house, my grandfather and my great-grandfather. There also used to be a psychiatric hospital not too far from here, years ago. I don't know if that matters, but it's one of those details that has always stayed in the back of my mind. The first strange thing I remember happened when I was little enough to still sleep in my parents' room. They would put me to bed early, then leave me there while they stayed up for a few more hours. But I was never good at falling asleep. And almost every night, I would see this man moving around the room. He wasn't standing over me or trying to scare me. He would just walk around quietly, almost like he was tidying up or doing chores. Nothing ever moved. Nothing dramatic happened. He was just there, busy with something I couldn't understand. For a long time, I told myself I was just a child with too much imagination. Then one day, I mentioned it to my younger sister, Lena, and she went pale. She told me she had seen him too when she was little. The same man, the same quiet movements, the same feeling that he wasn't angry or dangerous. That should have comforted me, maybe, but it didn't, because after that, other things started happening. When I was about 7 or 8, I was lying in my old bedroom trying to fall asleep. The door opened just a little. I looked over, and in the dark, I thought I saw my mother standing there. But something was wrong. I didn't speak, partly because I was supposed to be asleep, but mostly because my whole body felt tight with fear. Whoever or whatever it was looked like my mother, but it didn't feel like her. It had this strange grin, and it was wearing red pajamas. My mother didn't own anything like that at the time. It stayed there for a moment, just looking in. Then the door closed. The part that still bothers me is that a few years later, my mother was given pajamas almost exactly like the ones I had seen that night. Around the time I was 9 or 10, Lena started sleepwalking. She had always talked in her sleep, but this was different. Some nights she would get out of bed and stand beside mine, facing me with her eyes closed. Then she would walk toward our open bedroom door, but she never stepped into the hallway. She would call out for our parents in the dark, but she stayed inside the room, right at the threshold, like something outside scared her. I was young, but even then I noticed it. It felt like she wanted help, but didn't dare leave. When I was around 12, something else happened. Back then, we still kept all the doors open at night. From my bed, I could see straight into the living room, where my mother usually sat with her laptop until late. I was on my phone, and every now and then I would glance up to see if she was still there. At one point, I looked up and saw her sitting there like usual. Then I looked away for just a second to drink some water. When I turned back, she was looking directly at me. The laptop light was shining up onto her face, and something about it felt so wrong that I immediately looked away. When I looked back again, the laptop was off, and she was gone. I didn't check. I didn't call out. I just lay down and forced myself to sleep because this heavy, awful dread had settled over me. Another night during summer, I was awake on my phone again. The door was closed. The window was closed too. It was around 3 in the morning when I suddenly felt something rush past my bed. Not heard. Felt. Like someone ran right beside me. There was a burst of cold air, sharp and fast, and I sat up immediately. I looked over, thinking maybe Lena had gotten up. But she was asleep in her bed. Years passed, and things still happened. Not constantly, but enough that the house never felt completely still. About a year ago, Lena was home alone. She knew she was alone because she had checked the rooms. She was lying in bed, in the same spot where my bed used to be, scrolling on her phone. Then she heard someone call her name. She answered automatically, then froze because nobody was supposed to be there. Our front door is huge and metal. You cannot open it quietly. If someone had come home, she would have heard it. But she heard her name again, more than once. No one came to her door. No footsteps. No explanation. So she stayed in bed until our parents actually came home. Another time, maybe 2 summers ago, Lena and I came back late from an event. She fell asleep on the couch in the living room while I made myself something to eat. While I was in the kitchen, I saw a dark shape near the doorway. It looked like a person. I was tired, so I told myself it was nothing, just my eyes playing tricks on me. I ate, washed the dishes, and tried not to think about it. Lena was still asleep on the couch, snoring actually. I stepped out of the living room and left the door slightly open. I had just closed all the windows in there, so there shouldn't have been any breeze. I went into the hallway and started talking to my grandmother. Maybe 10 seconds passed. Then I heard footsteps behind me. The living room door handle turned and the door closed. I called Lena's name. No answer. I wanted to go back in, but I couldn't make myself do it. I just went to my room. Later, when I told Lena, she swore she had never gotten up. And yes, she sleepwalked as a child, but she hadn't done that in years. So for her to suddenly do it on the exact night I saw that shadow by the doorway felt like too much of a coincidence. The worst thing that happened to me recently was last summer, after I moved into a new room upstairs. Nothing strange had happened there before. I thought maybe being away from the old bedroom would help. Then one night, around 3 in the morning, I was awake with my headphones on. I thought I heard a knock, so I took them off. 4 knocks came from my door, clear, slow, deliberate. I froze because there was no reason for anyone in my family to knock at that hour. My TV was on, but the volume was low, so I wondered if maybe the sound had come from there. I stood up and watched the TV. Then the 4 knocks came again. Not from the TV. From the door. I walked over to lock it, and right when I got close, the knocks happened again, louder this time, more forceful. Like whoever was outside wanted me to understand that they were right there. Something in me snapped. I hit my hand against the door and told it to leave. Then I locked the door and sat in bed, completely terrified, until the sun came up. The next night, I heard scratching at the door. I told it out loud to leave me alone. And it stopped immediately. The most recent thing happened about a month ago. I was out of town when Lena called me in the middle of the night. She sounded scared. She said she kept hearing noises from my room upstairs, my desk moving. And that desk has a very specific, ugly scraping sound that nothing else in the house makes. My TV turning on and off, the volume going up and down. Footsteps. She sent our mother upstairs to check, but nothing had moved. Nothing was out of place. Later, Lena admitted it wasn't the first time she had heard things moving in my room. It was just the first time it had been that loud. Now she checks my room regularly when I'm gone. I don't know how connected this is, but I've had nightmares for as long as I can remember, and almost all of them take place in this house. Dreams about break-ins, being attacked in my sleep, and sometimes the exact things I've heard or seen here showing up again after I close my eyes. I'm not telling this because I know what it means. I don't. I'm telling it because I've carried these memories for years, and saying them out loud makes them feel a little less trapped inside me. What I do know is that this house has never felt empty. And for some reason, whatever is here has always seemed most interested in me and my sister. I was talking with my wife the other night about something that happened to me a long time ago, out in the quiet woods of eastern Connecticut. This would have been somewhere around 2007, maybe 2008. She told me I should write it down somewhere and see what people make of it, because honestly, I still don't know. At the time, I was visiting a friend of mine, Dan. He lived out in that Chaplin, Hampton, Scotland area, where the houses are spread apart and the woods behind them just keep going. Miles of trees, no streetlights, no neighbors close enough to casually wave at, just dark forest pressing in around the edge of the yard. It was late, probably close to 2:30 in the morning. Dan was sitting on the back porch smoking a cigarette, and I was standing in the driveway with my keys in my hand. We had this habit of saying goodbye for 30 or 40 minutes before I actually left. You know how that goes. One last story turns into 5 more, and nobody moves. So we were standing there, just talking, when we heard laughter coming from deep in the woods. And at first, I really did think it was people. A lot of people. It sounded like a whole crowd had just heard the funniest joke of their lives. Not normal laughter either. This was screaming laughter. Breathless, frantic, full-body laughter. Like dozens of people completely losing control. I remember thinking, well, someone's having a wild party out there. But then it kept going. It didn't rise and fall the way laughter usually does. It just stayed there, rolling through the trees, loud and hysterical and wrong. It went on for at least a full minute, maybe longer. Dan and I stopped talking and just stared toward the tree line. Neither of us said much at first. We were both trying to make our brains fit a normal explanation around what we were hearing. Then, while we were standing there talking quietly about how strange it was, the sound moved. I don't mean it gradually got closer. I mean 1 second it sounded far away, buried somewhere deep in the woods, and the next second it was right near the edge of the light from the flood lamp on the side of his house. It came in so fast that my stomach dropped. For a few seconds, it was incredibly loud. Right there, just beyond where the light ended, that same awful chorus of laughter, shrieking and gasping and laughing like it was painful. But there were no footsteps, no branches breaking, no leaves rustling, nothing moving through the brush, just the laughter. Then it shot off in another direction, still without any other sound, and faded away into the distance. Dan and I just stood there for a bit. I don't remember either of us trying to act tough. There was no big dramatic moment. We were just quiet, because whatever that was had scraped something raw inside the air. Later on, we tried looking it up online. Every answer was the same kind of thing. Coyotes, foxes, fisher cats, some animal making weird noises in the woods. And listen, I've lived in New England my whole life. I know what coyotes sound like. I know what fisher cats sound like. I've heard foxes scream. I grew up with those noises. This wasn't that. This sounded human. Not happy human. Not drunk human. Not even scared human. It sounded like laughter that had gone bad somehow. laughter like it hurt. I should probably say this first. I've never been someone who believes in ghosts, spirits, or anything paranormal. Honestly, outside of horror films, I've always had a pretty strong dislike for the whole idea of contacting the dead. I've seen it as something that can take advantage of people when they're grieving, when they're vulnerable, when they're looking for comfort anywhere they can find it. So I'm not telling this as someone who was already looking for signs. But something happened today that, for the first time in my life, made me stop and wonder whether there might be something after death. Not in a dramatic, lightning strike sort of way, more in a quiet, unsettling way that I can't quite explain away. About 7 years ago, I lost my stepdad, Martin, very suddenly to sepsis. There was no warning. One moment life was normal, and then it wasn't. I was away at the time, so I never got to say goodbye to him. He had been a huge part of my life. He and his 2 children lived with my mom, my sister, and me through a lot of my childhood and teenage years. He wasn't just someone who passed through. He helped shape the house I grew up in. When my son was born 2 years ago, we gave him Martin's name as one of his middle names. As he's grown, we've occasionally shown him photos and said, "That's one of your granddads." We usually call him Granddad Marty when we talk about him. Not constantly, not every week, just now and then. Today was my son's 2nd birthday party. My mom was there, my sister was there, and Martin's 2 children were there too. One of them is about to become a dad himself, and he came along with his heavily pregnant partner. We're not all together like that very often, so it already felt a bit special. The party went really well. Near the end, I took my son outside to the village green across the road from the hall. There's a cricket pitch in the middle, and the grass was being watered by a sprinkler. My little boy was mostly watching some older kids kicking a football around nearby. He didn't say anything strange at the time, nothing that stood out. Later, after we got home, my wife asked him, "Who did you see at your party today?" And he said very clearly, "Granddad Marty." I froze a bit. It's not a name he says often. In fact, I don't think I'd heard him say it in months. Maybe not ever. Not properly. At first, I thought it must have been a fluke, one of those random toddler things. But when we asked him again, he repeated it. More than once. Then during bath time, I asked him gently, "Did you see Granddad Marty at your party?" He said, "Yes, Granddad Marty safe by the water." That was the part that really got me. I asked him a few different ways what he meant. Toddlers don't exactly give clean, polished answers, so it took a bit of back and forth. But in his own little roundabout way, he seemed to be talking about the water on the cricket pitch, the sprinkler, the wet grass, that place we'd walked to after the party. And he kept repeating the same basic thing. Granddad Marty was there, by the water, and he was safe. I don't know what to do with that. I'm not saying I suddenly believe in ghosts. I'm not saying I have some grand explanation. But I know what he said, and I know how rarely that name comes up in our day-to-day life. The feeling wasn't frightening exactly. It didn't feel sinister. It was more like the room had shifted half an inch, and everything familiar looked slightly different. I keep trying to rationalize it, because that's what I do. But this one has stayed with me. And I suppose I'm left wondering whether anyone else, especially people who consider themselves skeptics, has ever experienced something like this. Something small, strange, and oddly comforting. Something you can't quite file away, no matter how hard you try. boyfriend Mason and I bought our house in 2023. It had been in his family for a long time. It belonged to his great aunt and great uncle, and after his great aunt passed away, we ended up buying it. She didn't pass in the house, just to be clear, but from the moment we moved in, the place felt occupied. And I don't mean in a subtle, maybe it's just the pipes kind of way. There was knocking. Not random creaks, but rhythmic knocking. Footsteps upstairs when we were both downstairs. Furniture scraping across the floor above us, even though nobody was up there. Things would vanish from where we knew we left them, then show back up days, weeks, sometimes months later in places that made absolutely no sense. Our dog would suddenly freeze, stare into a corner, growl with his hackles raised, and we'd just look at each other like, okay, so we're doing this again. At first, we weren't scared. Mason and I have gone ghost hunting plenty of times, so it takes a lot to really shake us. Honestly, most of it was more annoying than frightening. But then it started taking things. One time, an entire bottle of dish soap disappeared from the kitchen sink. I looked everywhere. I finally gave up and bought a new one. Months later, we found the missing bottle sitting at the bottom of the basement stairs. That was the moment I thought, all right, whoever you are, this is getting old. So I went to see a medium. She told me there were 4 spirits in the house. Mason's great aunt and great uncle, a little girl maybe around 5 or 6 years old, and a young man, probably early 20s. She said the little girl and the young man weren't connected to the house or the land. According to her, they were drawn to me. She said I had medium abilities, and honestly, I didn't love hearing that. I know some people would be curious or excited, but I'm not really interested in opening that door any wider. Maybe that sounds foolish, but I don't want to invite more of it in. I already had what I believe was Mason's great aunt speaking directly into my ear once, and that was enough for me. The medium also said she didn't sense anything dark or malicious. So after that, we mostly just lived with it. Something would happen, and we'd say, "It's just them," and move on with our day. But lately, it feels different. A few nights ago, I was putting away dishes before bed when I noticed one of our kitchen knives sitting on top of the pantry, blade facing outward. Neither of us would have put it there. There's no reason for it to be there at all. At almost the exact same time, Mason saw a full apparition standing in our bedroom doorway. He thinks it was his great uncle, based on old family photos. Before that, anything we saw had been more like shadows, shapes passing through the house, or figures in the windows when we were outside. But this was clear. Then last night, around 3 a.m., the footsteps started again. Only this time, they were loud. It sounded like someone running up and down the stairs, hard enough to wake me from a dead sleep. That's when I realized I don't think I can just brush this off anymore. I don't know if saging is the best option. I'm not religious, but I'm also not against having the house blessed. At this point, I'm open to anything that might help calm the house down, or clear out whatever is starting to make itself a little too comfortable here. I think I was in 5th grade when I had the first experience that really stayed with me. It wasn't the first strange thing that ever happened to me, but it was the first one that felt impossible to explain away. Years later, I read something about how the brain tries to make sense of things it can't fully process. When we see something unfamiliar, something outside what we know, our mind may dress it up as something recognizable. And maybe that's what happened. Because what I saw, standing in my bathroom and staring straight at me, looked exactly like Charmy, the little fire Pokemon. I know how ridiculous that sounds. I really do. But in that moment, it didn't feel funny at all. It stood there for about 15 seconds, just watching me. I stared back, frozen. Then I ran as fast as I could to my parents' room, screaming that Charmy was going to kill me. After that, the sleep paralysis started. It began in that same house. Every time it happened, I would see a spirit near me. It felt like it knew I couldn't move, and it would taunt me because of it. A couple of years later, my family moved to Brussels, Belgium. We lived in a house that was around 300 years old. I picked the bedroom on the top floor because, honestly, what teenager wouldn't want an entire level of the house to themselves? But my room was different. It was cold. Not just a little chilly, but much colder than the rest of the house. Even the other rooms on that same floor felt normal compared to mine. We had people come look at the radiator more than once, but nothing ever really changed. That room stayed cold. Soon after we moved in, the sleep paralysis came back. Only this time, it was stronger. There was always a figure in the corner of the room, near the radiator. It wore something dark, almost like a cloak. It was darker than the darkness around it, and it had this heavy presence that made the whole room feel smaller. It watched me sleep. Night after night, I would wake up unable to move, and there it would be. If I tried not to look at it, I would feel like something was lifting me or throwing me around the room. Sometimes I would slam back down onto the bed and suddenly be able to move again, gasping and sitting upright. As time went on, it got worse. Sometimes I would already be awake, fully conscious, and then I'd feel something pulling me back down into paralysis. This happened for years, consistently, almost every night. But only in that room. When I slept somewhere else in the house, it usually stopped. That doesn't mean I never had sleep paralysis outside of that bedroom. Once, my mother and I went on a weekend trip to Dublin, and during the day, we went on a ghost tour. That night, in our hotel room, I had sleep paralysis again. A dark figure leaned over me, but it wasn't the same cloaked figure from Brussels. By that point, I had started to feel that the figure in my room was feminine somehow. I don't know why. I just felt it. My parents thought I was dealing with night terrors, or maybe some kind of neurological issue. And maybe they were right. I still can't say for sure. Eventually, we found out we were moving back to the States. Not long before we left Belgium, something changed. The figure that had always stayed in the corner began moving closer. Then one night, during sleep paralysis, it came toward me quickly. It didn't walk so much as glide. As it approached, it changed shape. Suddenly, it looked like a boy from my class, someone I had a crush on at the time. I'm gay, but back then, in high school, I was struggling with that part of myself. I didn't really know how to hold it yet. So this thing came toward me wearing the face and body of someone I secretly wanted. It reached out one finger and touched me. The second it touched my body, a burst of light shot out of it. At that exact moment, I broke free from the paralysis and sat up. And at the same time, I had an orgasm. I know that's strange to say out loud, but that's what happened. It touched me. The light burst out. I woke up, and then it was gone. That was the last time it ever bothered me. Soon after, we moved from Belgium to Memphis, Tennessee. After that, I started seeing things outside of sleep paralysis, even while I was awake. Not constantly, just often enough to make me wonder if something was wrong with me. I've spent years asking myself what really happened. Was that entity something dark that got what it wanted from me? Did it take something? Did it leave something behind? Was some part of me split off and kept somewhere I can't reach? Or was it the opposite? Maybe the light that came out wasn't from it. Maybe it was from me. Maybe whatever was inside me pushed it away for good. I honestly don't know. Since then, I've struggled with addiction. Heroin followed me for more than a decade. I haven't used it in 5 years, but now I'm fighting other things, like benzos and stimulants, just trying to get through life. And I've noticed that I keep attracting people with dark intentions, people who drain me, people who feel familiar in the worst way. So I keep wondering if something happened back then that marked me somehow. Maybe I'm looking for meaning in something my brain created. Maybe it was sleep paralysis, trauma, fear, and desire all tangled together in one impossible knot. Or maybe something really did come into that room with me. I don't know. But I do know this. Whatever it was, I'm still here. And if there was light in that moment, even a flash of it, then maybe it didn't win. Maybe I did. I still wonder sometimes if that house is haunted. I only lived there for about 4 years, but honestly, that was enough. The activity got so bad that it scared me and my brother out of feeling safe there. It never felt like just one thing in the house either. It felt crowded, like there were multiple spirits there, and most of them didn't feel kind. Some of them scared my family. Some of them hurt us. And I'm still pretty sure something from that house followed me after I left. I don't even live in San Antonio anymore, but I still think about it. I always wanted to know what happened on that property. I heard a rumor that someone died on the land, but I never knew if that was true. I wish I had a way to find out, because whatever was there felt like it had a history. I'll tell you a few of the things I saw. The first one happened when I was a kid. I used to wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, just normal kid stuff. But some nights, I would wake up for no reason at all. I'd roll over, and there he'd be. A little boy, probably around the same age I was back then. He wore a blue plaid shirt, and he'd be sitting there playing with my little kitchen set like it belonged to him. He never spoke to me. He just played. After my mom smudged the house, he stopped showing up. Then there was the thing with my room. My room was set up in the worst way possible. My bed was right in the center, my mirror faced me, and I had 2 doors, one to the closet and one to the hallway. At night, I would sometimes wake up and see this gray hand clawing at the doorknob. I didn't stay to investigate. I still had enough survival instinct in me to get out of there. I'd run downstairs to my parents' room. But one night, I saw more than just the hand. It was like the hand had a body attached to it now. There was this woman, or something pretending to be one. Her face looked stretched in a horrible way, almost like a screaming mask, except her jaw dropped all the way down toward her chest. Her eyes were huge and sunken, and her mouth and eyes looked completely black, like empty holes. She barely had any hair, just a few thin strands. Her clothes were ripped and matted, and I could see her ribs through them. She hid behind my parents' bedroom door. And my mom saw her too. Before anyone asks, no, I wasn't watching scary movies. I wasn't allowed to watch horror, and we had parental controls on everything. I didn't have anywhere to get an image like that from. There was another one I called the Crooked Man, because he was always hunched over. Sometimes I'd go downstairs and, for some reason, I'd look behind my dad's recliner. There wasn't anything back there. No electronics, no weird lights, nothing that could explain it. But I'd see this pitch-black figure standing there. His eyes were bright white, and he leaned on a cane. He never moved toward me. He never spoke. He just stood there and stared until I turned on the light. Then, when I turned the light off again, he'd be gone. One day, I asked my dad if I could get a popsicle from the garage freezer. He said yes, so I went out, grabbed one, and started heading back upstairs. Then I heard my dad yell my name. Not quietly, not far away. He shouted it angrily, clear as day. Jame! That wasn't my real name, but that's what I'll use here. I ran back downstairs and said, "Yes, sir?" He looked confused and told me, "I didn't call you." I explained what happened and he just kind of paused and said, "That's weird." And that was it. But I knew what I heard. Another night is the reason I still sleep with my door closed. I had just come back from the bathroom and accidentally left the bathroom light on. My bedroom door was open, so the hallway was lit enough for me to see clearly. I was lying in bed, just trying to relax, when I saw a woman pacing outside my room. She was wearing a long wedding dress and a veil over her head. She was holding a bouquet of flowers and she was crying blood. I had never been to a wedding at that point. I didn't really have any reason to picture something like that. She just paced back and forth, slow and heavy, like she was trapped in a memory. Then she walked straight through the wall and disappeared. Another time, it was the middle of the night again. I had just used the bathroom and the house was completely dark. I didn't know how to just close my eyes and fall asleep, so I would usually stare into the darkness until I got tired. Then I heard someone call me from the bottom of the stairs. "Jame." It was in this sing-song voice, the exact kind of voice my dad used when he was joking around. But it was around midnight, and something about it felt wrong immediately. My dad barely slept sometimes, sure, but why would he be standing at the bottom of the stairs calling me like that in the middle of the night? I didn't answer. In the morning, I asked him about it. He told me he never called me. There were other things too. I'd wake up with bruises I couldn't explain. Sometimes chunks of my hair would be missing. Things would disappear from where I knew I had left them. The whole house felt like it was always moving things around, always watching, always waiting for someone to notice. And the strangest part is, I miss it. I know that sounds ridiculous. That house scared me. It hurt us. It felt haunted in the deepest possible way. But I still miss it. I miss the place. I miss the people I knew there. And in a way I can't fully explain, I even miss the presence of whatever was inside that house. I just wish I knew what happened there. Because something happened. Something had to. I wanted to share this here because I'm honestly still trying to understand what happened, and I'm wondering if anyone else has ever felt anything like it. A few days ago, on a Sunday, I reached out to someone who does energy clearing and spiritual healing work. I'd been going through a really difficult period in my life, and while there's a longer story behind that, I'll leave it aside for now because it isn't really the main point. When I spoke with her, she said she felt I needed help pretty urgently, so she offered to do a quick evaluation for me that same day without charging me. One of the things she told me was that there were negative energies attached to me. She described them as energies connected to grief, fear, panic, loneliness, stress, and feeling unsafe. She said they might be affecting my everyday life more than I realized. Now, I do consider myself a spiritual person. I've also had a lot of sleep paralysis experiences in the past. I don't get them as often anymore, but sometimes when I meditate, I still feel sensations that remind me of them. Usually, though, those experiences only happen when I'm lying flat on my back. The sensations are usually like vibration, buzzing, or tingling. Sometimes I feel like I can't move. But that Sunday night felt different. I went to bed completely exhausted. I was sleeping on my side, not on my back, which is why this stood out to me. At some point, things became strange and blurry. I can't say for sure if I was dreaming, half awake, or in some kind of out-of-body state. My memory of it isn't perfectly clear. What I do remember is suddenly feeling this very strong vibration. It wasn't just a light buzzing. It felt heavy, almost like something was pressing into me or trying to enter my body. It was intense. I didn't move, or maybe I couldn't move. I'm not sure. It felt like it lasted for a long time. Then I started speaking. At least, I think I spoke out loud. But it didn't feel like the words were fully coming from me. It felt more like something was speaking through me. I remember saying something close to, "I'm angry because I'm not here." The tone felt frustrated, almost bitter. Right away, my mind connected it to what the energy healer had told me earlier. I thought maybe one of those negative spirits was expressing anger because it didn't have a physical life or body the way I do. I know there were more words after that, but I can't remember them clearly. What stayed with me was the feeling of being invaded, like I wasn't fully in control of my own body, like I was saying things that didn't fit my own thoughts or my own life. I've had sleep paralysis before, and this had some similarities, but it also felt different. It was less terrifying in one way, but much more intense physically. The vibration was stronger than anything I remember feeling before. So now I'm left wondering what actually happened. Maybe it was just a dream. Maybe I was half asleep and my mind turned the whole thing into something spiritual because of the conversation I had earlier that day. But it felt so real. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Do you think it could have been a spirit trying to communicate before being cleared away? Or was it more likely some kind of sleep paralysis or dream state? I work night shifts at a pretty isolated site, tucked between a busy expressway and a stretch of nature reserve. It's the kind of place that feels normal during the day, but once the lights thin out at night, every sound seems to travel a little farther than it should. A few nights ago, the police showed up at our office. They said they had received dozens of calls from a number registered to our location. Not one or two calls, around 50. The strange part was that the number belonged to a phone inside an underused conference room right next to the office where I was working. Management came rushing back in, and the night technicians, along with the IT team, started checking everything. They tested the phone, they checked the lines, they pulled up the camera footage and reviewed the door access logs. Everything looked normal. No fault with the phone, no one entered the room. No one was seen leaving it either. And yet, somehow, that phone had called the police again and again from an empty room. The room itself sits on the basement level, between the main office area and an access corridor. There are no windows in there, just two doors, one leading into the office and the other into the corridor. During the day, people mostly use it as a shortcut or a quiet place to rest. Hardly anyone actually holds meetings there anymore. At night, it used to be a common spot for staff to nap during the dead hours, usually between 1 and 3 in the morning. But lately, I've noticed people don't really sleep in there anymore. Thinking back now, I've used that room for naps during night shifts too. And honestly, most of the time, I had strange dreams in there. Not every single time, but often enough that I remember it. I would wake up heavy-headed, drained, and more tired than before I slept. At the time, I blamed it on night shift exhaustion. I figured I was just sleep-deprived. But after the police incident, a few things started coming back to me. Last month, a coworker, Marin, who almost never used that room, went in there to finish a report. She came out less than half an hour later, saying the room smelled damp and moldy, and that her face had started itching badly. She ended up leaving work early. A few days later, she had such a severe skin reaction that she was out for nearly 2 weeks. Then there was the last time I slept in that room, about 2 weeks ago. I overslept so badly my coworkers had to wake me up. The night before that, I had also overslept in the same room during the quiet hours. At the time, I laughed it off. Now, I'm not so sure. After the phone calls, I started asking a few coworkers about that room. Every single person I asked had something odd to say. Some said they had weird dreams there. Some said they woke up feeling completely exhausted, almost like they hadn't slept at all. One coworker even told me he once experienced sleep paralysis in that exact room. So now I keep thinking about it. Maybe the dreams weren't just dreams. Maybe the tiredness wasn't just from night shift. And maybe there really is something in that room. When I was little, probably 6 or 7, I spent a lot of time at my grandma's house out in rural East Georgia. Her place had woods all around it. Not deep, endless wilderness or anything, because there were other homes scattered around the area, but to a kid, those woods felt huge, quiet, spread out. The kind of place where the trees seemed to lean in and listen. And whenever I went outside alone, I would hear this voice. It was high-pitched, almost like a whistle, but not quite. It sounded feminine, light, and strangely clear. And it always called the same thing. Yoo-hoo! That was the closest way I could describe it. Like someone was trying to get my attention from somewhere deeper in the trees. I hated it. I never went more than a few feet into the woods by myself because of that sound. The weirdest part was, the closer I got to the trees, the faster the calls came. If I stayed near the yard, I might hear it every so often. But if I stepped into the woods, even just a little, the time between each yoo-hoo got shorter. Like whatever it was knew I was getting closer. But whenever I walked through those same woods with my dad or my grandma, I never heard it. Not once. They didn't hear anything either. They both told me it was probably my imagination, or a bird, or just one of those little noises kids turn into something bigger. I almost believed that. Then one afternoon, my cousin Nolan came over. He was about my age, and we were playing outside when I heard it again. Yoo-hoo! I froze, and before I could say anything, Nolan looked toward the woods and asked, "Did you hear that?" That was the first time anyone else had heard it. Of course, being 6 and far braver than he should have been, Nolan wanted to go see what it was. I really didn't want to, but I also didn't want him going alone, so I followed him. The deeper we went, the louder it got. Yoo-hoo! Again and again. It didn't sound like an animal. It didn't sound like a bird call. It sounded like a woman, or maybe a girl, calling from somewhere ahead of us. Eventually, the trees started thinning, and I saw a clearing up ahead. In the middle of it was this old, broken-down house. It looked abandoned in a way that made your stomach tighten. Weathered wood, sagging parts, windows that looked dark and empty. I remember stopping before we stepped fully out of the woods. I told Nolan, "Don't go any closer." And thankfully, he listened. We just stood there at the edge of the trees, staring at that house. Then the calling got louder. Not closer exactly, but louder. Yoo-hoo! That was enough for both of us. We turned and ran as fast as we could back through the woods and straight into my grandma's house. We told her everything. She didn't believe us, not really. She said no one had lived in that old house for years, and nobody had any reason to be around it. She told us that if we heard something, it was probably just some kind of animal. but she also told us not to go near that house. After that day, I still heard the voice sometimes, but I started ignoring it. Eventually, it stopped. Or maybe I stopped listening. I'm not sure which. My grandma passed away when I was 9, and after that, I didn't go to the property much unless I was helping my dad maintain the land. By the time I was a teenager, I never heard the sound anymore. Later on, some relatives bought that part of the land, tore down the old house, and built a new one there. I've wondered for years what that voice was. This would have been in the early 2000s, in rural central East Georgia. The area wasn't completely isolated, but the woods around my grandma's place were empty enough that it didn't feel like someone could just be standing out there every single time I went outside, making the exact same call in the exact same tone. And I really don't think it was a person. I don't know what person would be waiting out there, always calling only when I was alone, always stopping when adults were with me. All I know is that it sounded human. A high, feminine voice from the trees, calling me closer. I was in middle school when this happened, and back then, almost every weekend, I'd hang out with my friend Colby. We were both really into mountain biking, especially on old backcountry trails and dirt roads where there weren't many people around. We lived near a small town in Massachusetts called Huntington, so there were plenty of quiet wooded places to ride. One weekend, we were heading back to Colby's house, riding down this empty dirt road with woods on both sides and no houses anywhere nearby. It was the kind of road we'd taken 100 times before without anything strange happening. Then, out of nowhere, something came flying out of the trees on one side of the road. We both slammed on our brakes and looked around, immediately thinking it had to be another friend of ours messing with us. He had a habit of pulling dumb pranks, especially if we left without waiting for him. So we called out, half annoyed and half laughing, telling him to cut it out. But nobody answered. A few seconds later, a rock came flying straight at my head. It missed, barely, and before I could even react, a stick came whipping past, then another rock. One of them hit my hand hard enough that I dropped my bike. I ran across the road and ducked behind a tree. Colby did the same thing, but when he looked over at me from behind his tree, I saw blood running down the side of his face. That's when we stopped thinking it was funny. We yelled into the woods that whoever was doing this needed to knock it off, that it wasn't funny anymore, and that they were about to get themselves in serious trouble. And honestly, that was the wrong thing to say. Right after that, everything went insane. Rocks, sticks, and full-sized fallen branches started flying out from the trees on the opposite side of the road. Not just a few, I mean a storm of them. It was so much that there was no way one person was throwing it. Not even 10 people. It felt like it would have taken a whole crowd hiding in the woods to throw that much at once. And some of the branches were way too big for anyone to throw like that. The strangest part was the way they moved. They didn't arc through the air like normal thrown objects. They shot past us in perfectly straight lines, like they were being launched from something invisible, then disappeared deeper into the woods behind us. We stayed pinned behind those trees for what felt like forever. It was probably close to 10 minutes, but when you're scared like that, time stretches into something meaner. Finally, Colby started yelling that we were sorry and that we'd leave. I didn't know what else to do, so I yelled the same thing. The second I said it, everything stopped. No rocks, no branches, no rustling, no birds, nothing. Just silence. We slowly stepped out from behind our trees, and that's when I saw something that still bothers me to this day. Across the road, right where all that stuff had been coming from, there was an old, broken-down shack. And I know that might not sound like much, but we had ridden that road countless times. That shack had never been there before. I'm completely sure of it. It also wasn't there when we first stopped our bikes, But there it was, sitting in the woods like it had been waiting for us to notice it. Neither of us said a word. We ran for our bikes, jumped on, and right as we started pedaling, we heard the long, rusty squeal of a door hinge opening behind us. We didn't look back. We just rode as hard as we could until we were out of there. That was the last time Colby and I ever went mountain biking together. Actually, it was the last time I ever went mountain biking at all. I'm 20 now, and I still live with my parents out in the countryside. Our place is pretty isolated, and it sits near what used to be a major battle site from the Taranaki Wars here in New Zealand. I don't know if that matters or if my brain just likes adding extra shadows to things, but it's always been in the back of my mind. The house itself is split into two very different parts. There's the original farmhouse, which was built around the 1920s, and then there's the newer extension that was added sometime in the late 80s or early 90s. I sleep in the newer part, and I'm grateful for that, honestly, because the older side of the house has always felt wrong to me. Not evil exactly, just heavy, stale. Like the air in there has been holding its breath for 100 years. There's a doorway that connects the new part to the old farmhouse, and sometimes when I look through it, I get this awful feeling that something on the other side is looking back. I know people scare themselves all the time, especially in old houses, but this has never felt like ordinary nerves. The first time something really strange happened was about a year or so ago. My girlfriend, Leah, was over, and the rest of my family had gone to visit relatives a few hours away. The house was completely empty except for us. Or at least, it was supposed to be. We were in my room, and while we were together, I suddenly heard someone yell my name from the living room. Clear as anything. The living room is in the old part of the house. At first, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. You know, your mind grabs a random noise and dresses it up in familiar clothes. But then Leah froze and told me to stop. She started covering herself, thinking someone had come home and might walk in. Then she got annoyed with me and asked why I hadn't told her anyone else was in the house. But there wasn't anyone. I checked everywhere. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, all the bedrooms. Nothing. I went outside and looked down the driveway. Only my car was there. I checked the sheds too, just to calm myself down, but they were empty. We tried to laugh it off after that, though neither of us really found it funny. A little later, my dog suddenly went absolutely wild. Not barking at the road. Not barking at a possum or someone outside. He was standing in the doorway between the new part and the old part of the house, staring straight into the living room. He wouldn't move. He just kept barking into that room like something was standing there. That was when the whole thing stopped feeling like a weird little moment and started feeling real. Since then, I've heard my name called when I'm home alone more times than I can count. Sometimes it sounds like one of my parents. Sometimes it sounds close. Sometimes it comes from the old side of the house. And the dogs notice things too. They'll suddenly track something with their eyes, following empty space across a room like they're watching someone walk past. I finally brought it up with my sister, Miri, not too long ago. I told her I was starting to think the house might actually be haunted. I kind of wish I hadn't asked. Her room is in the old farmhouse section, and she told me that most nights she wakes up and sees her blankets slowly sinking down like something had been underneath them and was slipping away. She also said she often feels someone sitting at the end of her bed. Not hears it. Feels it. Like the mattress actually dips. Then there was this one time when my parents were away on holiday, and it was just me and my siblings at home for a few weeks. I was at work when Miri texted me asking what I wanted. I had no idea what she meant. She said I had just yelled her name from somewhere in the house. but I wasn't there. I know she could have been messing with me, but honestly, I don't think she was. And she's not the only one in the family who thinks something is wrong with that old part of the house. I don't know what's there. I don't know if it's tied to the land, or the farmhouse, or the history underneath it all. But I know this much. When the old side of the house goes quiet, it doesn't feel empty. It feels like it's listening